Good afternoon. I'm Fred Patrick, Director of the Vera Center on Sentencing and Corrections. We're pleased to welcome you here today. I want to thank all of you for joining us here, both here in New York City at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, in Connecticut at the Cheshire Correctional Institution, and for those who are joining us live via live stream. I should add that the T.R.U.E unit, which is where we will focus on today in Connecticut, stands for truthfulness to oneself and others, respectfulness towards the community, understanding ourselves and what brought us here, and elevating into success. What do you think of that? How about T.R.U.E? Let's give them a hand. I want you to know that we're doing something pretty technologically complex today in order to ensure that the members of T.R.U.E, the staff and residents there, are able to fully and actively participate in this. And so if there's an occasional disruption or technical glitch, please bear with us. So some of you have asked why Reimagine and why Reimagine now? Americans are being newly asked to reckon with the truth of our nation's past, including an examination of the deep roots that our current prison practices have in the country's history of legalized slavery and racial oppression. This reckoning must include a deep consideration of the purpose and use of incarceration in this country. While many express dissatisfaction with the current system in terms of its budgetary impact, extremely high recidivism rates, and lost opportunities for so many, reform efforts have generally tended to focus on reducing the flow of people into prison and jails, aka sentencing reform, as well as working to improve reentry supports for those in the community once they return home. This is certainly something we ought to do and need to do. We must, however, also evaluate our current prison practices and include a critical reexamination of the purpose and experience of incarceration. Why should we care how we treat individuals who are incarcerated? Why do we need to care? Simply stated, there are 1.5 million people behind prison bars, and that number rises to 2.2 million if you include jails. These are our brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers, loved ones, cousins, nephews, nieces, co-workers, fellow students, and importantly, fellow Americans, fellow citizens and members of this broader American society, the vast majority of whom are coming home, over 600,000 people annually returning to our communities. And the cold reality is that none of the harm, damages, and collateral consequences that flow from incarceration changes that fact. Notwithstanding the T.R.U.E unit, which you'll hear so much about today, and other examples that it has inspired in places around the country, the vast majority of jails and prisons are still characterized by endless days and weeks and months and years of idleness and isolation. Members who are incarcerated there lose their names and identities, and that's replaced by numbers and uniforms. And none of those things actually contribute to the successful return and thriving of individuals when they return to the community. And let's be clear, current conditions in America's prisons, including inadequate staffing, training, recruitment, and quality of life, are also not conducive to staff, and often leads to high stress levels, frequent turnover, and an unnecessary and inhumane us against them mentality. There's clearly a better way. Americans, we can do better, we must do better. Our Reimagining Prison report, which is being released today, presents a vision of what can come to pass should we as a nation, as a society, decide that incarceration will no longer be used as a tool for racial oppression. It presents a vision of incarceration rooted in human dignity, and the T.R.U.E unit serves as a proof point of the very real promise and possibility of such an approach should we decide that that's what we want to do, and we muster the courage, the leadership, and commitment to do so. Many of you were with us in June 2016 in Philadelphia at the historic Eastern State Penitentiary when we launched the Reimagine Prison project. And while today's event represents a culmination of that project, it does not, I repeat, does not represent the culmination of this movement, a movement to transform the conditions of confinement in America, a movement to transform how we treat individuals who are incarcerated. In fact, today's event and the report itself are intended to leverage the convergence of the criminal justice reform movement and then increased consciousness around racial and social injustice to shine a bright light on that very aspect of the inhumane treatment of individuals and our obligation to demand better. We aim to inspire, to encourage, to energize, to galvanize you collectively and individually to reshape the practice of imprisonment by grounded in operational and philosophical principles and practices of human dignity. To further fuel this movement, we're pleased to publicly announce today that Vera, we will be taking a 38-member delegation to Germany and Norway later this week to further examine and be inspired to act by those two systems with their focus on human dignity. What we've tried to do over the course of this project in the last 2 or so years, and with the transformation we've seen in Connecticut, is to use history to inspire us to reach beyond the familiar and the incremental. We want to be truly transformational and transformative. And we want to investigate, interrogate, research, and with Connecticut prove that a different approach to incarceration, one grounded in human dignity, is possible. We believe you will experience that yourself today here in this room, where we'll talk about our aspirations, our vision, and how we think that can be scaled. You'll go to Cheshire Prison in Connecticut, where we'll hear from those who are incarcerated and who work there in a prison that has dared to reimagine itself. One way that reimagining has actually taken place in Connecticut is through family engagement, engaging the members of those incarcerated individuals and their loved ones. And I want to extend a special thanks and a special recognition and welcome to the family members of the T.R.U.E residents and mentors who are joining us both live here in New York City as well as on via live stream. Let's give a hand to those individuals who've been supporting their loved ones. We also want to recognize Galaxy Gives and the Ford Foundation for their tremendous support of this event today, and for the Robert Wilson Charitable Trust Fund for its support of the Reimagining Prison project. Can we please give a hand to those generous individuals? Let me turn to some logistics. Full bios are in your program, so you'll hear very brief introductions today so that we can efficiently and effectively get through the program that we have in store for you today. We will begin here in New York, where we'll be welcomed by Carol Mason, the president of John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and Carol will then moderate the first panel. From there, we turn to Cheshire in Connecticut, where Scott Semple, the Corrections Commissioner in Connecticut, will welcome you, and he'll introduce the panel there. We'll have a brief question and answer period following the panel there, and that Q&A will be in both locations, so those of you here will be able to ask questions there. I should add, though, due to time constraints, we'll only be able to take 2 to 3 questions from here. We then return to Connecticut, where you will hear from Michael Murphy, a famous architect, and he'll talk about his work with us around Reimagining Prison and the design concepts by which you can capture the humanity that we're seeking to capture. We then return to New York, where Candace Jones, the president of the Public Welfare Foundation, will lead a discussion on how do we take this idea of Reimagining Prison to scale. Again, there will be time for brief Q&A after that panel from both locations again. We'll then head back to the T.R.U.E unit in Connecticut, where we'll be joined by students from John Jay College here who will be on site there, as well as residents in the T.R.U.E program, and they will dialogue in conversation with Baz Dreisinger, who's a professor here at John Jay College and the academic founder of the Prison to College Pipeline program. And now, without further ado, I introduce you to Carol Mason, president of John Jay College.
We always have a little technical issue with my height here. So good afternoon. And thanks, Fred. This is a wonderful occasion to be able to celebrate the wonderful work that Vera has done. And Fred has been a tireless educator for me in this work from my time at the Department of Justice. So good afternoon and welcome to John Jay. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. You'll hear shortly from Governor Malloy from Connecticut and Commissioner Scott Semple, who's doing this remotely. And I just remembered I'm supposed to slow down because of the transmission speed. But we've got so many criminal justice advocates and corrections officers here to celebrate this rethinking and reimagining prison in the United States. I'd also like to give a special thanks to Nick Turner and everyone at Vera Institute of Justice. John Jay treasures our partnership with Vera, and they fund some wonderful fellowship programs for us. And it's Vera's ceaseless work that is moving the needle forward on criminal justice reform. It's making us ask the difficult questions, and it's making us envision a more fair and more humane system. I was at the International Association of Chiefs of Police yesterday, and it's wonderful that we're all working outside of our silos to do this work together. And one of the most powerful moments that I've had since being president here at John Jay was attending the Prison to College Pipeline program at Otisville State Prison. Our students at Otisville, because that's what they are, our students are absolutely amazing. They are some of the best students we have, and as one of our professors said, that when she asks a question, unlike in some classes, every hand goes up. They are so anxious to learn and to be educated. And one of our recent graduates, who's now an ambassador for the Prison to College Pipeline program, just graduated, and I had the pleasure of giving Devon Simmons his diploma this year. And one of the things I want you to know about Devon is that until he went to the program at Otisville, he hadn't been in an official classroom in 13 years because he came through during that time period where we were not allowing prison education to happen. But Devon went on to graduate from Ostos College, and then he went on to graduate here at John Jay with a 3.9 grade point average. Devon was on honor roll every single semester he was in college. And he's now traveling to South Africa, England, Jamaica, and Cuba, trying to create higher education opportunities for people incarcerated across the world. And can you imagine what the world would be like if everyone who is caught up in our criminal justice system had the opportunity to be educated, to get a college degree, and investing in their future and what a better country we would be. Later in this conference, you're going to hear from Baz Dressinger, who is the woman who was responsible for creating the Prison to College pipeline here at John Jay. And I love the way that she flipped the script on what we used to hear people talking about the school to prison pipeline. No longer. It's called supportive discipline. And what we now have is making sure that anyone caught up in our criminal justice system has an opportunity to go to college. So it is my hope that after this discussion today, that I know that all of us have already signed on to this reimagining, that we're all believers in what can happen. And so the goal after today is to move from believing what's possible to making it a reality. So do I have a commitment from all of you all about that? So I am watching the clock because we've got this really timed closely with going back and forth with simulcasting. We're testing technology. So we are going to continue with a conversation on the why and how we are going to be reimagining prison. So there's a video that will come up now while the panel gets seated. So.
These scenes of a chain gang were filmed in Georgia on January 21st and 22nd, 1938.
Where do we value freedom? And if we truly value freedom, would our system look like it does today?
The 4-day insurrection at New York's Attica State Prison came to a tragic end this morning.
How can you not be in a rage when you know that you are always at risk of death in the streets or enslavement in the prison system?
We have an opportunity, and I believe an obligation, to make a different choice.
We have to value an individual's humanity and believe in man's capacity to change.
If we see people as people, then we'll treat people as people, period.
And now we have our panelists. First, we have Nick Turner, who's the president of the Vera Institute of Justice. Next, we have Governor Malloy of Connecticut. And next to him, we have Stanley Richards, who is the executive vice president of the Fortune Society. And you'll hear him, it's in your programs, but you'll hear more of a sense of what they do as they respond to the questions. But this is a remarkable panel, so please join me in welcoming them and thanking them for being here. So I first met Nick in 2013, shortly after he took over as head of Vera. And I learned quickly that when Nick says he's going to do something, it happens. So get ready, because we are going to reimagine prison. So this report, this remarkable report, talks about the history of how our prisons came to be and what we're currently doing. What was your goal when you set out on this bold ambition to reimagine our prison system?
Well, I think I have to bring it back to the first visit that we took to Germany in June of 2015, and the goal there was, we learn by analogy. I mean, part of what we do as human beings is we compare ourselves and what we do to others, and that helps us to think about where we need to course correct or do things differently. And so the idea of going to a country where the incarceration rate is a tenth of what it is in this country, where a life sentence is 21 years, where 85% of the people who are processed through the criminal justice system just get a day fine. It felt important to see that and to help us to reflect and think about what we should be doing differently. And that is what really spurred us to think about reimagining prison. But if I'm honest about it, we knew that we needed to do something big, that we needed to create a North Star, essentially, for us to sort of reframe the how, what, and why of imprisonment in this country. But I will be honest and say that I didn't know, and I don't know that my team knew exactly where we were going. And so I liken it almost to, this is a terrible thing to say while Hurricane Michael is hitting the Gulf Coast, but I liken it to how hurricanes build over the ocean, and they start just as a weather pattern, and we knew that we needed to do something. We weren't sure where it was going. And reimagining prison, this idea that we needed to confront our history and confront the dehumanization that exists in our prison system, and then embrace human dignity to do that, not only in the report, but in some work that has happened in Connecticut. And on the very practical level, that just grew in power, and it became clearer and clearer that we needed to say something bold, give ourselves a much bigger goal to shoot for.
So thank you. Governor Malloy, I'm going to, because he referenced you as a partner, and I will say that during my time at the Department of Justice, we used Connecticut as a model for what was possible. So what was it, you've been a prosecutor, you've been a defense counsel, what was it that drove you as governor to embrace this work?
Throughout my adult life, I've recognized the weaknesses in the criminal justice system and how unfairly it treats people in poverty and people of color, and how opportunities afforded a white or wealthy population aren't afforded to those groups of people. And I also came to understand that we had too many people in prison for the wrong reasons, and that we had to stop sending children to prison, because when you send a child to prison, you are likely to have him for the rest of his life, periodically. And if we could break that continuum that gets established very rapidly, if we could have an effect on that, then we could ultimately lower crime very substantially. We could have a fairer system. And the dollars that we spend in our prisons could be better spent in those prisons in other ways. And quite frankly, having participated for a portion of the trip to Germany and understanding how different that system was, and how they looked at prison as an opportunity for change. And we simply tend to look at prison as a punishment vehicle, and we should exact the highest possible price. If we could change that dynamic in the United States, then we would have less crime, lower rates of recidivism, and we could really turn lives around. I mean, if you think about folks in prison, you can waste all your time, or you can be invested in that time. But you need the institution itself to be invested in that time as well, and that needs to, we really have to change people's minds about that. So I'm happy to be part of it, but I will go back to the fact that as a prosecutor in New York City, I came to understand back in the early 1980s how unfair the system was, and how opportunities were not afforded universally.
Thank you. Stan, as leader of an organization, Fortune Society, that helps people restart their lives when they come out of our criminal justice system or prison system, we all know that listening to people who've been part of the system is really the only way that we can have some effective change, is understanding that experience. So tell us what it is we need to hear from the people who've been in our prison system in order to reimagine it.
So thank you, Carol. As I listen to Nick and Governor Malloy, they're absolutely right. At Fortune Society, we see about 7,000 people a year. And we have a couple of sayings that really drive all of our interactions with people who walk through our door. And one is that the crime is what people did, it's not who they are. So we are really big on separating for the people who walk through our doors, to let them know that they are not the worst thing that they've ever done, right? And so, talking about humanity, we see them for who they are at the moment they walk through the door. We don't ask them what they did, we don't ask them how long they served, we don't ask them how long they're gonna be on parole. We say, what is it that you want out of your life right now? That's number one. Number two is that we see hope in people when they come in, and the beauty in people. As a formerly incarcerated man of color, I spent most of my life cycling in and out of prison. I did not see the beauty in myself. It wasn't until my last incarceration when I went to school and I realized that I was not all the things all my teachers told me, all of the people I interacted. I wasn't the dumbest guy in the class. I wasn't worth anything. I realized that I wasn't that. And so school really laid the foundation for me to see the beauty in myself. And then that led to hope. And so at Fortune, what we try to do is to provide hope. Over 50% of our staff are formerly incarcerated. 30% of our exec team is formerly incarcerated. So we really do two things: walk the talk, and then we see the beauty in people sometimes before they see it in themselves. And we wrap that beauty around them until they can see it and carry it for themselves. It's a really powerful movement.
Love this theme of the opportunity that are in people who are caught up in our criminal justice system. So Nick, you took a big risk trying to take on this big project and bring all these various voices to the table. Tell us how you moved from the idea of what this could be to getting this product out.
Well, again, if I'm honest, we took a year longer than we thought we would, because we really had to figure out where we were going. And I go back to the two themes that I brought up at the outset. One was the notion of this sort of gathering storm, and then the other was this notion of the importance of having something to compare ourselves to. And so when we first went to Germany, and I remember seeing all of these small details of life in prison in Germany. A resident of a prison walk by us, coming back from work, take off his shoes, put on his slippers, take the keys out of his pocket, open his door, go into his door. Others coming up to talk to us, just to chat without officers coming around and feeling that there was a security threat. Newspapers put every morning put in the door handles for the residents to read. And all of these incidents of humanity and treating people in a way where their lives inside of prison were meant to be as normalized and as much like their lives outside, and the value of just being treated like a human in the way that Stan talks about, that was incredibly powerful. And then we came back to this country. We had a bunch of stakeholder meetings with corrections leaders and incarcerated people and formerly incarcerated people and scholars. And it was actually a little bit clear that that sort of vision of something bold and incredibly different than what we've ever done before, that was missing for almost all of us in the conversation. And that we're talking about making incremental change. We need more evidence-based programs, but it would stop there. It didn't question the fundamental basis of why we do what we do, the history of it, how we treat people, and where all of that comes from. And so what emerged for us in the process was that we needed to get to that fundamental questioning of what the system is built on, of white supremacy and racial oppression, a dehumanization of people so that we see them as other, and that if we didn't tackle that, then we would be failing in a mission to try to create a picture of what could be. But we didn't know that at the beginning, and I don't know that all of the folks we talked to knew that in the process. And it really just, it grew over the course of time. And I think that seeing things like the Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama, and the Legacy Museum just signaled to us that now was the time to own the history, to not be a participant in suppressing it anymore, but to embrace it as an organization and to write it into the story that we believe needed to be told, and then to offer a solution, which is an embrace of human dignity, which is an embrace of the young man that Stanley talked about, but for everyone who is affected by the system.
So, Governor Malloy, you've heard about what he intended to do in the galvanizing storm in a positive way. This is a storm we want to hit, and hit hard. How did he convince you to be the pilot demonstration project in Connecticut for Reimagining Prison?
In fairness, we had started the day I got elected. I had a desire to end the death penalty in Connecticut. We did that year one. I wanted to decriminalize marijuana because I understood that black and brown kids were disproportionately impacted by that first arrest, and in many cases underrepresented by the folks who should be looking out for them. And then it just went from there. I mean, you know, if you think about one of the fights that took us a couple of years to win was this idea that if you simple possession of drugs near a housing project or a school or certain other facilities could automatically be treated as a felony, and then you draw the maps of where that happens, and it's always in an urban environment. It's always disproportionately affecting people in poverty or black or brown people. And so we changed that. I will say that getting myself and Commissioner Semple, who you'll hear from, to Germany was an eye-opening experience for the next round of what we wanted to do in the second term. But we had started this thing really from day one, because I can't say I was born wanting to take this issue on, but I understood that you know, prison was where opportunity ended, and I wanted to make us change that dynamic so that prison is the opportunity to save people. First, by not having them go to prison, particularly when they're young, but secondly, to understand that there's time and it doesn't have to be wasted. And there are things that we can do along the lines of what's done in Germany, where they have job training programs that immediately lead to a job placement while, in many cases, while you're still incarcerated. And you leave the campus and you work as a chef, or you work in one of the other fields, and then you come back and you're there for the night. These are important concepts. The concepts of keeping family together. I mean, you know, taking an 18 or 19-year-old or 20-year-old or 21-year-old person and isolating them from their family, isolating them from their siblings, and in the cases where they have children, makes no sense. It breaks the bonds that would otherwise support, and we needed to change that. So this thing is just growing, and I'm happy we've played a role, and I hope you know, our prison population has gone from when I was elected, from about 18,000 down to 13,000. By January, it will be below 13,000, which will be the lowest number since 1993. And right now, we are the only state that's getting close to having halved our prison population, which we will do in the next couple of years.
With no change in public safety.
No, we've had a gigantic change in public safety.
Improvement, yes.
You know, between 12 and 16, we had the largest decline in violent crime of any state in the nation, and in that period of time, we did that by a third over the next closest state. And
so I just wanted to make it,
down.
you hear that connection. There's a significant decrease in incarceration, and a significant decrease in violent crime.
And we're producing fewer permanent prisoners, or long-term interactions, because we have, we studied, one of the things we studied was how many people in prison over the age of 25 were incarcerated before the age of 21, or during 21 and before. And it's like 75%. We have reduced the number of that cohort of now 18 to 21. We've reduced that cohort by over 65%. That means that at some point, 65 fewer percentage of people are going to, of that 75, are going to be available to be incarcerated over the age of 25, because somehow, in some way, we got them through the stupid stage.
So we'll get back to that brain development piece later, but Nick?
I think I just want to add a quick coda to what the governor said. And you asked him a question. So first of all, is that he needed no convincing of doing something. We were surprised when he came back from Germany and he said, I want to try something different. The second thing is that we really, again, I just want to be clear about this, we didn't know what the thing was we were doing, but there were three values that really lay at the base of it. One was, what we saw overseas was a commitment to human dignity, and that needed to be a fundamental touchstone for whatever the intervention, T.R.U.E. in this case, would look like. The second thing was something that I don't think we do enough in the public sector, which is to sort of embrace serendipity and possibility and risk, and to not have a blueprint for the thing that we were creating, but to say that we need to innovate and do something different. There wasn't necessarily going to be a big fat evidence base supporting it, but we needed to try something different. And we know we have a system where there's a ton of evidence that what we're doing right now isn't working, so we took that stab. And then the third thing that's important, that I think the governor would agree with me when we think about our staffs, is that we empowered our staffs, from Warden Urfi to Commissioner Semple, to my colleagues Alex and Ryan, and they did the same thing with the residents and the staff of the prison. This was about co-creation of a new and different environment. It was not about sort of heroic visioning of a thing that we would do and then we just come in and get it done. And it got back to asking the residents, what would make this a better environment for you? What do you want? Asking the same thing of the staff, and it ended up being a very beautiful thing. And so if the audience takes anything away from this, that's the thing that you should take away from, that there's so much intelligence and wisdom and creativity in these places that can help reshape the places.
And that's why, yeah. And that's why sort of taking this opportunity and having human dignity be the centerpiece of this reimagining our prisons is so critically important. At Fortune, every day we say, we create the world we wish we lived in. So when people walk through that door, that's exactly how we engage them. Like, we value what they bring to the table. We see the possibilities in them. And so that really is the foundation about how you start systemic change. That's how you start individual change. And we have done some amazing things in New York. Nick and I were part of the Lippman Commission and came up with a blueprint about how we could fundamentally change our criminal justice system. When I was on Rikers Island, it was 22,000 people incarcerated in New York City. Today we're at 8,200. Same situation like Connecticut. Safety is up, crime is down, incarceration's down, and we now have the possibility of closing Rikers and having a much smaller footprint in terms of criminal justice. And I was telling Nick and Fred, part of being a co-chair of the Closed Rikers Commission is I'm going to be infusing in our design discussions that very principle about human dignity. So as we build these smaller facilities, how do we build it so that we create the culture that we want? We don't want the culture that exists on Rikers Island. We want a new culture.
So help me, and I don't want to cut off the discussion because this is what this is, the conversation, so ignore my question if you want to keep saying something else. But so this is about risk, but not in the risk in the sense that people typically use the term. It's the risk in seizing an opportunity, seizing a moment, and not being bound by tradition. So if you're talking to someone who is not in this room, who's already among the converted and believing in this change, how do you get them there? I know it's not one of the questions you prepared for, sorry. But I know you're prepared for it every day of your lives. So how do you persuade the audience, because I'm hoping somebody's recording this, how do you persuade the audience that needs to hear that we need to fundamentally rethink what we're doing with our prison system?
So Joanne and I do a new hire breakfast every month or two. And we say we're going to be as good as the people we bring in the door to work at Fortune. And part of what we say is that there's one cardinal rule we have in the organization. All the other stuff you can figure out. Here's the cardinal rule. Treat people the way you want to be treated. And if we have that as the centerpiece of our conversation, whether you're on the right, whether you're on the left, we can all relate to how I want to be treated. Because I personally remember when I was treated like I didn't matter. I remember when I was treated like I was invisible. I remember as a 6-foot man, 200 and something pounds, when someone didn't see me or they seen me as a threat. And so when we can have the conversation about, it's not a conversation about should we have safe communities, should we have healthy communities? Absolutely. What we are talking about is treating people the way that we want to be treated. So you're starting from a place of human dignity, and then you're building out from that. And how do you build out from that? You build out by supporting people. You build out by adding resources. I looked at a report that came out from the State Department of Education, and they looked at investments in education from PK to 12, and investments in corrections from the city and states. 107% increase on the education from PK to 12, 335% increase in correction spending. That is about our values, that is about how we see people, and that is about what the report that Vera put out, the fundamental issue in that report is that it's about keeping black and brown people down, keeping them out of mainstream.
You know, if I could just for a second, you know, I visited Connecticut prisons 23 times during the time that I've been governor. I think we need to get more people to visit prisons and to understand how dehumanizing they are and how much wasted time and wasted space is involved and how they don't work, at least as they're traditionally run. And that with some change, like the T.R.U.E unit at Cheshire, which you'll see and hear about. That's not just a positive for the people who are in that unit in that prison. It has been a positive for the entire population of the prison. When correction guards come up to me and say that the finest experience they've had in 30-plus year careers as corrections officers or 20-plus years is being in the T.R.U.E unit, that sends a message to everybody else that there's another way to do these things.
And it's not just a message for those people who are there, it's a message for their families and their communities. And I will tell you that from Otisville, because the students at John Jay who participate with the John Jay students at Otisville, it's got a huge impact on the community here and the experience of our students here as well.
And just one final thing, because we have what's modeled on the T.R.U.E unit, but it's called the Worth unit at the women's prison in Connecticut. And it has changed that place. And so all of a sudden, folks who would be dismissive of change become advocates of change. And when you show them, when you can have the largest decrease in violent crime of any state in the nation for 4 years in a row, or when you can see your population drop and your crime drop as rapidly, and when you understand how damaging sending young people to prison is on a permanent basis, and if you can cut that off and eliminate that, in most cases, how much safer your state, your city, your neighborhood will be as a result. Final thing I would say is, bad things are going to happen. And the reason bad things are going to happen because they always do. We have crime. Mistakes get made. But that was happening with a bad system and bad results. Now we have an improved system with far better results, and we have to be able to take the heat for the mistakes that will be made from time to time or the bad things that happen because there are so far fewer of them.
I want, if I could, to put a pin in something that the governor said. He said that he's been to 23 prisons in the time that he's been in office. And Brian Stevenson talks about it in a different way. He talks about the need to get proximate. And that's something that I think is essential for all of us. You see it reflected in the program we have today. We're not just talking about the residents and the staff of T.R.U.E. You will hear them talk themselves. They are full participants in this event. When we started the Reimagining Prison effort, one of the things that we did is we had a few weeks where we encouraged prison visits all over the country. Because part of what we're trying to do is tear down the master narrative that everyone in prison is depraved and violent and scary. And that's rooted in our own racism, but it's certainly what the vast majority of Americans believe. And you don't get a chance to disbelieve that unless you're confronted with the humanity of people, unless you get a chance to talk to them and see them and realize, oh, I'm wrong about that. You think about the commentary that's happening in this city right now about a mass bailout that's going on, and the New York Post is going crazy, and others are going crazy about all of these violent, depraved folks who are going to get let out. And that is reifying, and it is based on the master narrative that everyone in prison is bad, not that they are human beings, fully dimensional,
These are people who haven't even been convicted of anything.
Right.
That we're talking about.
So
and they're coming home eventually, one way or the other. Why not have them better prepared to come home? And that's the important thing. The other thing, I should give some credit to my wife. My wife has visited prisons on multiple occasions. She's probably one of the most popular people at the women's prison for all of her work there. It's important to have partnerships, and I'm lucky to be a partner with Vera, but to have a spouse who's a partner and a leader. We've done 2 meetings in Connecticut on reimagining justice, and she really spearheaded that effort.
So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to talk about each, not to go. What we need to do, you talked about the political courage, because something bad will happen at some point with somebody who's been to one of these programs, but then we need to talk about all the good that's happened versus that one. So how do you arm the general public to be able to support people to take these kinds of risks?
I'll start. One of the things we're doing at Fortune is we're building and training a cadre of people who want to put a face on this issue, people who have went through the system and have come out the other side of it, because we think humanizing this conversation where people can't otherize them and put them to the side and say, it's them, it's not us. We're going to be putting a face on this, and we're going to be telling people our stories and our journeys, and we're going to be sharing that, yes, we might have done something that hurt our community, but we are not bad, we are not evil, we don't belong in cages and thrown away and forgotten, and we shouldn't be bearing what we've done when we were 15, 16, 17, or 22 until we're 50, 60, 70, until we're in our graves. And so we're going to be having that conversation, and we welcome anybody to continue that conversation.
I mean, I think that we do just what we're doing now, is that we supply a counter narrative for people, and that's what we try to do at Vera. Reimagining Prison is meant to tell people a different story than what they have been fed for decades and decades, and that's part of our job at Vera to do. And then the other part of our job is to take big risks and to try to do bigger things and to show that there is great possibility that runs counter to people's assumptions that it's not possible. I mean, this is a granular process. I mean, it's been decades and decades in which people have believed that nothing else is good other than to lock people away with nothing for years and years and years. And so it will take decades for us to keep doing this work, but I think we have to do it in a
I'm going to have to stop as much as you want to say something else, because we're going to have to go to Connecticut. Okay.
The most important thing we could do right now is to address traumas in young children and young people. And if we would address those traumas before they force a violent or criminal response, then we're a lot better off. That's it.
And I just want to say young people is through 25. So, the speaker's prerogative. So, please join me in thanking our panelists. And now, if everything works as it should, we are going to Connecticut to Commissioner Scott Semple at the Cheshire Correctional Institution. It worked.
Good. Okay, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome here to Cheshire and to our distinguished guests in New York, Governor Malloy, President of Vera, Nick Turner, the Vice President of the Fortune Society, Stan Richards, and the President of John Jay College, Carol Mason. Welcome all. I just want to personally state how appreciative that we are for everyone for making the time to be with us today for this event. And let's not forget the people who are watching this on their computers, wherever they are across the world. I have to admit that the thought of having a live streaming simulcast from inside of a prison was something that I could have not conceived of even in a few short years ago, never mind more than 30 years ago when I first started my career in the department. When I was thinking in anticipation about today's event and all of the technology that is necessary to make it happen, I ironically thought of an experience from nature, from which I believe many of you have also experienced, that of throwing a stone in a still pond and watching as the ripples radiate outwards from the center in other expanding circles. One ripple following after the other until it seems that the entire pond is covered with concentric circles of ripples. Today is essentially an electronic version of that ripple effect. I think of it as the electronic ripple effect of cumulative change, an effect from an initial event which can be followed outwards incrementally, over time ever expanding, creating ripples and waves of change. From the initial event when Governor Malloy, myself, the First Lady, and the good folks from Vera traveled to Germany back in June of 2015 to witness prisons, the likes of which none of us had ever seen before, the initial ripple traveled with me all the way across the ocean, back here to Connecticut, where with the support, encouragement of Governor Malloy, we began exploring the possibilities of creating an emerging adult facility. Soon, a committee was formed, comprised of staff members from across various disciplines throughout the agency. Individuals from Vera supported us throughout. The committee met frequently for the better part of a year, developing the ideology and foundation of what has become the first of its kind for emerging adults, known as the T.R.U.E. unit. The unit was officially dedicated back in March of 2017. The unit was designed to be comprised of 5 groups of 14 mentees for a total of 70 mentees, 18 to 25 years old, and 12 mentors. These are folks that primarily are viewed as lifers, and each group of 14 mentees is assigned 2 mentors, leaving 2 additional mentees to fill in, or mentors to fill in where needed. Approximately 100 staff members across all 3 of our shifts work in our T.R.U.E. unit. And prior to beginning work in the T.R.U.E. unit, these staff members received 3 weeks of intensive training above and beyond that of normal training of a correctional officer. Training that included but was not limited to human development and behavioral impacts, motivational interviewing and corrections, meditation, mediation, and conflict resolution for young adults, trauma-informed interventions for young adult offenders, and family engagement. The primary mission of the unit is to provide a non-threatening community within the confines of a prison, in which evidence-based programs are utilized to teach the population the coping skills required to handle adversity without impulsivity, that actions have meaningful consequences to not only them, but their community in which they reside. One of the most surprising aspects of this new initiative was the fact that all the staff members who work in the T.R.U.E. unit volunteered to do so. From the beginning of the T.R.U.E. unit's existence, the ripples of change radiated out across the agency. It wasn't long before we began planning an emerging adult unit for our female offenders, now known as the Worth unit. That opened on July 9th of this year. It should go without saying that in order to have a ripple effect, you need to have a lot of individual ripples. In other words, these emerging adult units would not exist if not for the collaborative efforts of many individuals, groups, and organizations, and we are grateful. The first group of collaborators that I would like to acknowledge are the professionals I knew I could rely on to turn this initiative from a concept into reality, the men and women who comprise the staff of this facility. I firmly believe their willingness not only to try, but embrace a new way of doing things is a major factor in the success of this unit. Staff working with mentors who both in turn work with the mentees to keep the T.R.U.E. unit progressing forward. We have been enlisting the help of family to assist us through the use of meaningful family engagement to reinforce positive outcomes and actions, helping the ripple effect change, transcend the correctional environment, and extend out into our community. I cannot go any further without acknowledging the efforts of one man. And although he has collaborated on many of these efforts to reimagine the way that we treat incarcerated people, he is so much more than a collaborator. He has been and continues to be a national leader in criminal justice reform in our nation. Continuing with the analogy of the pond, I would even argue that he was the person who threw the stone in the water in the first place, stirring the waters and starting that ripple effect. I am referring to our Governor, Daniel Malloy. Thank you, sir, for your leadership and your support, for all you have done for me personally and for this agency and for our state. And of course, I can never overstate the importance of the Vera Institute of Justice. They have been a constant companion from the very beginning. Their goal to reimagine prisons has been one of their guiding principles throughout their collaboration with the Department of Correction here in Connecticut. They have taught us many things along the way, while learning a few things from us as well. Many of the rewards of their efforts and the agency's efforts, or should I say our efforts, are on display here today on a global scale. As the ripple effect of what is being accomplished here in Connecticut, within the T.R.U.E. unit and within our Worth unit, travels away from the focal point here in Connecticut, the rest of the nation is taking note. We have been fortunate to host many jurisdictions from around the country who are interested in moving in this direction. Before we move on to the next portion of today's program, I would like to leave you with one final thought about change. It comes from William James, frequently referred to as the father of American psychology, and he said, quote, "Act as if what you do makes a difference. It does." Thank you all again for taking part in today's event and for your efforts to affect positive change for all of our citizens. With that, we have lots to do today. Next up is a panel of staff and residents of the T.R.U.E. unit, along with Ryan Shanahan of Vera, who are going to discuss the day-to-day activities within the T.R.U.E. unit. Afterwards, there will be a quick question and answer session. You are honored to have, also honored to have with us today a reporter from the National Public Radio, Carrie Johnson, who will act as the moderator of the panel discussion. Ms. Johnson, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. I'm Carrie Johnson. I'm the Justice Correspondent at NPR, and we're here to talk about Restoring Promise, the true story. I'm joined by Ryan Shanahan of the Vera Institute, Jennifer Peterson, who's a counselor supervisor here, Warden Scott Urfey, thank you for having us today, and two participants in the T.R.U.E program, Chris Belcher, a mentee, and Jermaine Young, also known as Swerve, a mentor. And we're gonna get kicked off here with Ryan. Ryan, you are no stranger to this facility. You are in here a lot. Why do this at Cheshire? What about this place made it the right place?
Thank you, Carrie. When we were thinking about trying to do something different with young adults, and we knew that we wanted to work in Connecticut after spending time with Semple and the governor in Germany, we were trying to figure out where should we go. There's a lot of prisons throughout the state, but with a lot of help from the work group and experts from Connecticut who've worked in the state for a long time, we chose Cheshire for a few reasons. First, family engagement is so important to the commissioner that Cheshire is off of bus lines. It's centrally located, so more families could become involved for the young men that were chosen to be a part of the unit. But also, it's called The Rock, and the staff that work here might get into that in a minute, but we knew that if it could work at The Rock, it could work anywhere in the state. The men who are incarcerated here, if they don't go to school or they don't have a job, they're locked in their cells for 22 hours a day. And so for them to transform into a space where men can be out of their cells for 16 hours a day and have a lot of autonomy of movement, they can go to an outdoor area if they need a breath of fresh air, all of that was critical to show the rest of the country that this change could be done. There was one other critical aspect of Cheshire, which the commissioner already talked about, which was that there is a group of men that had been meeting here for years and supporting each other through the trauma of having an inhumane life sentence without parole. And that group of men became the secret to the success. They and the staff that work here who volunteered to work on this unit came together to heal the rupture between the us versus them that can happen inside of prison spaces. And those men who were in the lifers group became the mentors who really set the stage for having a completely different relationship between staff and the people who live here. They're men who have written journal articles. They're men who let you borrow their watch when you forget yours at home. And they're leaders. They're leaders in the criminal justice reform field that don't get enough credit. But they really were part of what attracted us to this.
Warden, I understand you've started out as a corrections officer at age 19 and worked your way all up through the system. Of all people, why are you committed to this unit and this process? I understand you may have actually been a little reluctant in the beginning.
Because my commissioner told me to. No, I was thinking about it. The reluctancy that I had was a communication error. In an era where we as humans don't talk to each other anymore, we text each other. We lose a lot of communication in that process. And the communication error that we had was, I run not a supermax, but a maximum security prison, a level 4, and some of the ideology that was coming across from Alex at the time just wasn't syncing with what I had in mind at any point in time. After we sat down and talked about it, come to find out that we were saying the same thing, just different ways. And that's a life, changing event right there when you realize that you're saying the same thing but two different ways. And I'm committed to this unit because I've always been on the mindset where you need to have the ability to prepare somebody for the world. And the majority of our population is going to be getting out, and where are they going to live? They're going to be living right next to us. And if you don't prepare somebody to re-enter society, then you're not doing them any favors. You know, that's on one side of the spectrum. The other side of the spectrum is the staff. I've seen far too many of staff that have worked their 20 years or 25 years or however long they want to do, and then they can't enjoy it because of the stressors that we face every single day. And those stressors exist on both sides. So, you know, just to get it out there, Alex, it wasn't that, you know, I didn't agree with the ideology. It was just that we were speaking a different language, and we both know that now. But, you know, I am behind it 100%. You know, we have a lot of positivity that comes out of the unit. You know, our commissioner says it best. You know, our staff in corrections, we don't see positivity. We only see negativity. And if you think about it, you know, the way he says it, it's totally true. If an individual becomes incarcerated, goes out into the world and becomes successful, we don't see that. We don't see him again. If they are not successful, then we see that coming back in through our doors. And that's the negativity, you know, above and beyond the regular negativity that can exist in jail and prisons. So working this unit, talking to the staff, talking to the population, there is so much positivity, and to the point where staff want to come to work, you know, and the population is not, you know, it's not dreading another day. It's, okay, what are we going to learn today? And incorporating families into that whole process and having them help us is just, you know, it has opened up a whole nother door that's unbelievable.
Jennifer Peterson, you started out, have a background in counseling as a counselor, but perhaps even you had to rethink some of the ways that you learned in training in order to work with this T.R.U.E unit. How's it different? How's it actually different to work with this group?
It's very different. If you were to walk into the T.R.U.E unit, you're going to notice that you have staff just sitting at the tables playing cards. You have staff playing basketball. You have staff going down to family engagement sessions and engaging with the families. You have the counselors, you have the unit management staff reaching out to the families to, you know, touch base with them, see, you know, what's going on their end, and maybe, you know, getting some feedback from them as far as how we can manage and help their individuals grow. But the most important thing with me was that I had somebody that was close to me that, you know, became incarcerated just for a few days though. And it made me take a step back as, you know, in my profession and, you know, put myself in the shoes of the family members that have individuals that are incarcerated as well, and made me empathize with them and understand what they were going through. So it was life-changing for me, and these guys continue to make me grow as, you know, a supervisor in the unit. And I've learned a lot from them, and there are the barriers, the us versus them, and we work together on breaking those barriers, and it's just life-changing being a part of this process. So,
Jermaine Young, you were one of the original mentors in this program, and upstairs when you were giving us a fantastic tour of the unit, you talked about how it was really rewarding, but it could also be really challenging and drain you a lot. Why do you do this if it's hard? Why?
So when I was telling you about how it's mentally draining and emotionally draining, I wasn't saying that, and I want to get that across, not as a complaint. It's just real like that. It is emotionally and mentally draining. But all the self-gratification that you get, seeing these young guys elevate, that supersedes all of that. So being one of the original mentors down here in this unit, I think I had the wrong concept of what a mentor was all about. But now, since I've been over here for 20 months, I found a lane where I figured it out a little bit. So being a mentor is about teaching as well as being taught, or at least wanting to be taught. So what are we teaching down here? Being a mentor is not about coming down here telling these young brothers, listen, don't do that, don't do that. Nah, that's not what they heard that all their life. When I'm talking about teaching, I'm talking about teaching them how to be a human being again, because we throw that word human being around a lot, as well as dignity. Because when you come to jail, your first step in jail, your dignity is eviscerated at the door. So we're trying to restore that back by the programs that the mentors have created as well as facilitated. None of the programs that we facilitate or that we created are institutional programs. Those are programs from the mentors trying to get at the root of the problem. Because the punitive side of incarceration is just dealing with the external. Anybody could be locked up, but if you don't get at the root of the problem as far as being a human being, then we're doing a disservice. Because a lot of us from where we come from, especially the black and brown brothers, we live in a survival mode 24/7, 7 days a week. It's nothing but survival mode. So when you come to prison, that survival mode is still going on. So what we're trying to do is get them back to that human nature. And us getting them back to the human nature is teaching us how to be humans again. I never thought that I could come to prison and be vulnerable in front of other prisoners. I met other prisoners in regular population who I tell them, I got love for you because I really care for them. But now I'm at the point, because of the culture that we created, I could look at Chris and tell him like, yo, I love you, man. You know what I mean? And really mean it. You know what I mean? That's what we're creating over there. And it's not only for us, it's for the staff as well. The staff that gave in to this concept. You know, because it's not a big utopia over there, no. A lot of staff didn't give in to it yet. But at the same time, the staff that didn't give in to it, they're drowned it out by the positive staff members that have gave into it. So it's not, once again, it's not all about teaching young brothers to yo, listen, don't do this, don't do that. Nah, it's about getting to the root of the problem. Who are we as a people? How it feels to be a human being and have some dignity, to have some integrity, to not be talked about or talked down to in this condescending nature. That's what goes on in prison. You know, so if we dealing, like Governor Malloy said, if we dealing or looking at this as a public safety issue, why not get everybody correct before they go out to our neighborhoods? You know, because when we come to people who commit crimes, we have to keep in mind that, and I want to make this clear, and I'm not saying this to, not saying that we don't empathize with victims of crime, because I have family members that was victim of crime. I had family members that was murdered. But I will say this, a lot of times brothers commit crimes is because they are victims themselves. So you can't get incarcerated and start victimizing the victim. That doesn't work. You know what I mean? It doesn't work like that. That's why we still continually have this problem. So you have to create a culture where people are treated like human beings, and then we'll act like human beings, because if you're treated like an animal long enough, you're going to start acting like an animal.
I hear you're getting some shout outs. Chris Belcher, you're a mentee in this program, and you were talking a little upstairs about the little moments that give you dignity here. Things about, like, things as simple as your laundry, which turn out to be not so simple. What kinds of changes have you experienced in this unit, and how is it helping you to get where you want to go in your life?
Well, I've learned to place people at a higher value, and before coming to prison, I told myself that I would never find myself in the system. Yeah, I find myself in the same place that I tried to avoid. And basically what I want to do here is make true changes to myself and help other people change, so that I could be a success story to show those who've been marginalized and counted out that there is a way to beat the odds. Because a lot of us, we just want to be a part of something. And in our communities, it's rare that you find something positive to be a part of. It's easy to be a part of the streets, just walk outside. And that's one reason why mentors and us, we collaborate to create programs to constantly lessen leisure time. And I love the mentors for that. Like, I've created a love for everyone in the community. Like, especially the mentors. They're our family, they're our brothers, they're our mentors, they're our uncles, they're our fathers, and at times they are our punching bags, to where when we're not able to release the emotions that we're feeling, we let it out on them to not direct it nowhere else. And like, the whole experience, it's just been humanizing, because even with the relationship between COs and us inmates, it's been broken, and these relationships been strong. Like, for instance, I want to give a few examples. Like, there's an officer named Officer Vaz, and we have an intramural basketball team here in Cheshire, and he's our coach. So he wears another hat. So when we're in the court, we don't look at him as Officer Vaz. We see him as he's coach. And you rarely see that in prisons. And a few moments that really helped me learn to gain back my emotions and feel the dignity of someone caring for me is there's this time, a counselor, Ms. Boyceford. So usually we do check-ins in the morning to see how our days are going, and we give like words of encouragement or words of wisdom. And one day she's telling us how proud she is of what we're doing, and in the middle of her trying to tell us that, she starts crying and can't continue her message. And just the sign of her tears showing compassion towards us, saying that I wish I can do something for you, but I can't do nothing right now because I'm in a tight situation. And just that made me feel like there are people that care about me. And there was another instance that I remember vividly that I tell people all the time. Me and my mentor, Clyde. Now, at the beginning, when this program started, it was a shorter amount of people. So we're in a circle, and we were just going through some turmoil, and it gets to him, and out of nowhere, he just starts crying. He's like, he's going through stuff. He's trying to balance schoolwork, trying to balance the program. He's trying to get out of prison, work his way out of prison, and he's trying to get to his young brothers, and he started crying, and immediately I start crying. So me and him are just sitting there crying because I'm going through the same thing, but the difference is he has 50 years and I have 8. And just that sign of love and being able to become vulnerable, it meant a lot for me, and it really helped me like continue doing what I'm doing. And as far as like how it helped me realign my goals, this program, like, it brought so much consciousness to the bad habits I've created, and it helped me correct them. And so a lot of the goals that I plan on doing in the future is, first, I plan on graduating school, which I'm working towards right now. I'm a part of the Wesleyan program and should be receiving, thank you. And I should be receiving my associates this spring, but I plan on, even being released, I plan on becoming a strong advocate of prison reform and helping those that were in the same position as me, and trying to make things better for them.
Thank you. I want to go back to the warden and Jen Peterson. Why was this place called The Rock, and why is it challenging to keep with this program every single day?
Okay. Honestly, I don't know why it was called The Rock. I've only been here for 4 years, so it kind of came with the building. But it definitely has an old school mentality. The building was put up in 1910 as a reformatory, and it's always had that, it's got the galleys with it, it's got the old school look, the very architectural, old school prison style look. So that's why I imagine it's actually called The Rock.
It's intimidating when you look at it. Can you hear me?
Yep.
It's intimidating, yeah, when you look at it. So, coming into this maximum security prison, they're locked up 22 hours of the day. So that's intimidating as well. So it's the culture that just was created many years ago. And I came in 2011, and I just adapted it. I just moved along with it. So that's a little background.
Well, you're on this boat moving down the water, to pick up the analogy of the water from before. And parts of this institution, parts of this facility are doing very different things. And you all are paddling, at least this T.R.U.E unit, in a different direction. There are moments, there must be days when that's a very hard thing to do. How do you get through those days?
Well, we coined a phrase that we are flying the plane as we build it. Every single day is an adventure. We really don't know. Sometimes, certain things happen, and we don't know if the decision that we make is going to totally ruin the unit or if it's going to make it stronger. And luckily, through the training that we've implemented with the motivational interviewing, the conflict resolution, the help with the Vera Institute, MILPA, You know, through all the training that we've had, it's not an automatic seg trip. You know, when there is conflict and some things happen, we have different tools in our toolbox to handle the situation in a way that makes more sense. You know, corrections is a very black and white world. You know, we have policies and procedures, we follow our policies and procedures, we're good. There is nothing black and white about the T.R.U.E unit at all. It's totally in the gray, and it's taking that leap of faith every day and knowing that as long as you do and make the decisions that make sense and are humane, then we're good. And understanding that we didn't choose each other. You know, there's every single marriage that's out there, that nobody gets along every single day of the marriage, and you chose that person to be in your life for the rest of your life. You know, they didn't choose to be in prison, and we didn't choose, you know, for them to be in prison. So we're not gonna get along every day, and we just understand that, you know. And, you know, a big part of that is, honestly, the mentors. You know, with the help of the mentors, and, you know, they've been there, they've done that. They help us navigate through this system because, you know, a lot of the staff didn't grow up like that, you know, so it's easy for somebody. Plus, you know, with the decades of programming that have been done, you know, since birth on every side, you know, if you have a badge, you're bad. You know, if you don't have a badge, you got to watch out for the person with the badge. You know, and that goes both ways. We've broken that down, and the mentors have helped us break that down to the point where, you know, an individual can look at me and say, yeah, you don't know what I've been through. You didn't grow up like that. But they can't look at a mentor like that. And that's where the mentors are invaluable. And, you know, their leap of faith in trusting us, the staff, and the staff's leap of faith in trusting the mentors. And then the mentees come in, and everybody trusting each other. We just have to, we work it out, we talk it out, and that's the best way. Not everything ends up in an automatic trip to SEG.
Ryan Shanahan, oh, sorry, Jen, go ahead.
Yeah, just to build upon that, talking, like he said, is huge every day, and I don't come from where they come from. So there's a language barrier, and to understand their perspective is me stepping back and having them make me understand it. And that's key because, you know, I might see something differently with what they're trying to explain, and vice versa. So it's a learning experience as well, but with them, it's about talking with them and talking with the staff as well.
Ryan Shanahan, you're in the unique position of coming here and then leaving and going back to your life. I wonder if you could chart, in your view, how this process has evolved and whether anything has really surprised you along the way.
Everything surprises me about this. I often say, you know, 2 years ago, I hired Alex Frank to take this leap of faith with me to say, do you think that even though our goal is a society that handles bad behavior or bad choices differently, could we together help reimagine what prison might look like? And let's focus on young people, because the brain science will tell us a lot of things about young people, but the research also shows us that if we want and believe in a society that has race equity, that working with young people is where we will get the biggest bang for our buck, because the concentration of disproportionality within 18 to 25-year-olds is much greater. So we really wanted to focus on young people and reimagine prison. And I've been in this field since 1999, and that amount of experience taught me that this wasn't possible. I had just been working in a small county in a jail for kids, and they wouldn't let those kids visit with their brothers and sisters. And I worked with them for 1.5 years, and they still wouldn't let them visit with their brothers and sisters, and they were 14 years old. So everything that I knew told me this was not possible. So when Alex came in and started sparring, or having conversational differences is now what we're calling it. Yep. It was a communication issue with Warden Urfi. Yeah. And she kept pushing and kept pushing. I was just like, how is this working? You know, how are they agreeing to let us make these changes? wait, we're gonna have an outdoor area? What? Like, we're gonna have mentors? Like, it just, this is gonna turn from a young adult initiative to an intergenerational initiative. I think everything has surprised me, and I'm humbled by the courage that the staff took. I'm humbled by the courage that the men who live here took, because they all had to apply to be here. And it can get real comfortable where you're at, right? As Chris was saying, in a different world, he could have just been like, sorry, Clyde, dude, you gotta work that out yourself. I will be in my room until further notice. And in this unit, you're forced to deal with your emotions. And I don't know, Chris, if you can talk like a little bit more about that. There's no turning away from it. And so that takes bravery, and that vulnerability takes bravery. That humbles me, and you all know, because when I start talking about it, I also have been known to cry, so.
Yeah, being in the unit with everyone like 24 hours a day, you create this relationship with other people that remains beyond these prison walls. Like, there's a lot of people I'm in the block with where we've created business plans together. We're actual brothers, and it's just this brotherhood that you embrace one another, and you start to become selfless, and emotions arise to where you're willing to do whatever you can for this person out of love, because you know that they love you, and you reciprocate that. And it's reciprocated between everyone. And as one of the mentees in my group said, it's beautiful. It's real beautiful.
So have you been doing this now 20 months, I think you said. If you ruled the world, if you were king, what is your dream for the future of this place and this initiative?
First thing, I would get myself out of jail, but that's number one. But I've been incarcerated for 20 years, so only the last 20 months have I sort of changed my perception of prison. Because through those first 20 years, like I said earlier, it was just straight survival mode. Because we have to understand that even in the areas that we're from, not only when we come to prison, but inmates have been conditioned to look at staff a certain way, and staff have been conditioned to look at inmates a certain way. So to break that barrier, it takes time. I think we built that culture over there in the T.R.U.E unit. Not with everybody, but the majority of folk, we built that culture. So my vision would be that that type of culture exists throughout the whole Department of Corrections, as well as a lot of the programs that we have in the T.R.U.E unit come out to population as well. One program in particular is the reentry programs, because the T.R.U.E unit are involved with reentry, but reentry in population is sort of a secret, or at least it seems as a secret, because nobody really hears about reentry in the population. The T.R.U.E unit, we have that. You know what I mean? And we're going to need that, because if you don't really have nobody out there for you, it can seem like you're going outside into a trap. And what I mean by a trap is, if you're going out on probation, parole, special parole, and you have nowhere to go except your family's house, where most of our households, somebody in the family is on parole or probation, and one of your stipulations is that you can't be around a felon, what do you do now? Do you just risk going to that house so you'll have somewhere to lay your head? Or do you go try to find a shelter? Or do you do what most of us always do, resort back to survival mode and go back to the place where we know we can make some quick money just so we won't go hungry, or just so we could feed our kids? So this reentry thing, it needs to exist, not just in the T.R.U.E unit, but everywhere. It just can't be an open secret. This is real lives that we're dealing with. And that's not to come down on the reentry institutions, but I do think there's a lot of work to be done with those reentry institutions as far as coming to talk to individuals that are incarcerated, because the same individuals that the courts deem irredeemable, menaces to society. These are the same individuals in here right now that are trying to make this change and are willing to put the skin in the game to go out into the real world and make the change.
Chris, what do you think?
My vision I see is the philosophies that we live in the T.R.U.E program. I see it spreading throughout all prisons, all over the country. But what needs to happen is the institutions that are outside of us, they need to be engaged more, like parole and probation, halfway houses, and there needs to be some kind of measure. Like the T.R.U.E program should be the marker. Once spread, it should be the marker in measuring change. And once that change is measured, I feel as though sentences should be altered. Like there's many of the people in the unit who have over 50 years who are good-hearted, are role models, and should be released into society. So I see these people getting engaged and finding a way to get these people released into society.
In a few minutes, I'm going to be turning it over to Fred Patrick in New York to field the first audience question. We're going to take a question or two here as well, so think of your question. We have some microphones, maybe start to get lined up, and we're going to wrap up soon. Warden and Jen, you've been working inside correctional institutions for a long time. Do you see this kind of effort springing up elsewhere in the country? Should it?
Definitely. You know, like the commissioner said, we've had a lot of interest from a lot of other agencies that have come down toward the T.R.U.E unit. Massachusetts has already opened up a unit for 18 to 25-year-olds in a jail setting. We've already expanded to the female institution at York Correctional with the Worth unit. We'll be opening up another unit here to address exactly what Chris was talking about. You know, we're going to get parole involved. We're going to have, you know, entrepreneurs come in and take a look at their business plans to let them know what they need, what steps they need. We're going to have individuals to come in and who are willing to, and this is a huge part that needs to happen, is you need to have individuals that are willing to hire an ex-incarcerated individual. Otherwise, like Swerve said, they are going to revert back. Human nature, you're going to revert back and do what you know how to do to provide for yourself. That's basic human instinct. But it's definitely spreading. It needs to spread. I'd like to see sustainability. You know, Governor Malloy is going to be leaving soon. A new governor is going to come in. Hopefully, you know, he said it himself. You need to know that there is the possibility that something bad will happen, but we need to be able to push forward through that and not revert back to what we know and just keep pushing forward, because this is working. There's a lot of good numbers associated with this, a lot of good results. And again, just the aspect that you can't feel through the TV or through the web is the change in atmosphere in that unit itself. It doesn't feel like prison, and I've been doing this for 30 years. It's a good feeling. So it definitely needs to spread. It should spread. It is spreading, and it definitely needs to be sustained and grown.
Change is needed. That's for sure. Prison is a revolving door for some, and we need to bridge that gap from those doors into the community for support, so that when they do get out into our communities, they have something set up for them so that they don't revert back to what they're normally doing out in their neighborhoods. So change is definitely needed, and I feel that this is going to spread, and it already has. So,
parting thoughts from Ryan Shanahan about what about your experience in this unit, how it informs what needs to happen next, and also Carol Mason, to spring off something Carol said, how does one prepare for the likelihood, for the eventuality that maybe something bad will happen, but the overall effort may need to continue anyway?
I mean, I'd love to hear what Jermaine or Chris have to think about that. Like, if something were to bad happen on the T.R.U.E unit, what do you think should happen?
I don't like to even think that way. We have a thing in the T.R.U.E unit, we call it perfect imperfections, because we've learned how to deal with it and work through it. Me personally, I don't think nothing bad is going to happen to the T.R.U.E unit, but I will reiterate what one of the mentees said. Matter of fact, it was Duke. He's one of the elders, and only thing that I fear is that all this momentum that the T.R.U.E unit has right now, everybody coming up, we doing the simulcast and things like that. Once the administration changes, what is in place to keep this momentum going? What is in place to have these people know that the T.R.U.E unit is not a fluke? Like, this is real stuff that's going on. You know what I mean? Because I challenge anybody, like Urfi said, to go to any other unit, not only in Cheshire, but in the state of Connecticut, and feel those vibes in that unit, and then come feel the vibes in the T.R.U.E unit. It's completely different, because it's something real going on in there. It's not a fluke. So that's what I'm fearing right there.
If something bad happens, what I fear is it tainting people's opinion on what the program is about. Because even through me telling my experience, it does no justice to capture exactly what really happens in the T.R.U.E program. So even when something does happen, I know and I believe that we'll be able to get through it, and it'll make us stronger.
I think sustainability is the key component, and it's the mentors and mentees and the staff that live and work here every day that are going to lead the path for us, and we have to let them. We have to break down the walls of the prisons to allow for people to show us the way. We are not going to be able to program our way out of mass incarceration. We have to change the culture inside prisons. We have to also change the culture in the communities so that there are opportunities for the men who are doing so much work in here against so many odds, that they can live a life of success and be there for their families and be the men that they want to be and the women that they want to be from the Worth unit. So I think that's a great way to
That's a great way to end this. I'm hoping that the technology works and we can throw this to Fred Patrick in New York for the first question from New York.
If you would step forward, we have time for a few questions. To my left, yes.
Please share with us the role of crime victims, for example, the families of murdered victims, are playing in this process.
The question, just so that everyone hears it, is please share with us the role of crime victims in this effort.
I think Jermaine answered it the best when he talked about the way that the people on the unit are all victims who are working through this. I also believe that what we're trying to model on the unit through the conflict resolution has been really powerful. So when there is a challenge in the community, they resolve that conflict. But I don't know if Warden Urfi wants to talk more about if there's goals to bring more of the conflict resolution and restorative justice.
At the moment, what we're concentrating on is the two main phases of the program's initiatives, which was, when the commissioner came back and started the work groups and the studies, we learned that 25% of our incidents were as a result of an 18 to 25-year-old. So our first mission was to lower that percentage, which we've done drastically in the Worth unit. The second initiative was to work on reintegration back into society, and those are our two main focuses right now. And we're always open to branch out. But I tell everybody all the time, I want to be like Kentucky Fried Chicken. I want to be really good at chicken before I branch out to anything else. The work that we're doing, you don't understand. It's hard to understand that the decades of programming that have been done just in society on how you view somebody that we are trying to take away. And at a moment's notice, either side, not that there's really sides in the TRU unit, but anybody can revert back, like Swerve said. Anybody can revert back to what they know and what they're comfortable with. So it's a constant battle just to maintain a good balance within the unit. That being said, we're open to all suggestions on how to move forward and what is best to navigate what we're trying to do here.
Next question from my right side.
Good afternoon. My name is Ron Pierce from New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. When I was incarcerated in East Jersey State Prison, the New Jersey STEP program came in and they provided college education to the prison population with the aim toward getting degrees. And I was part of that. And what I've noticed is that because they kept it in population, the entire prison, the atmosphere of the entire prison changed, as the young man was speaking about. And my issue is, why is the TRU unit a confined unit rather than being brothers from the entire general population?
The question is, why is the TRU unit a dedicated unit within the facility as opposed to being a facility-wide effort?
Right.
Well, I think to start it off smaller is the best. The original intent when the commissioner came back from Germany was to take this unit and take an entire facility and repurpose it for an 18 to 25-year-old unit. And then when the committee got together and they started actually doing the research and looking at it, it became more feasible to make it a small unit, take the 18 to 25-year-olds from population, put them in this unit. Originally, the thought process wasn't to use mentors, but again, with our ideology, we decided to use mentors, and it's worked out, great. So again, the original thought process was to take an entire facility and repurpose it for an 18 to 25-year-old unit, and the entire unit would be like that. That being said, all the things that exist in general population also exist within the TRU unit. The opportunities to get jobs out on the compound, work within the unit itself is done on a community aspect, but anything that's open to population is also open to the TRU unit, to include college education.
And I'll just add that it's helpful to remember that the TRU unit is a part of this larger Restoring Promise initiative at Vera that is only 2 years old. And so we wanted to start small. And as Warden Urfi said, the work group came together and said, let's see if this works before we rush out to try to decide. We've seen in the past when other states have tried to take entire facilities and make them young adult facilities, and they turn into gladiator schools, right? They take young people and house them separately, but they don't change anything. So if you don't change anything, any of the ingredients, you're gonna have horrible outcomes. And what TRU has done is be able to test what are the ingredients that have to change at a small scale or a small unit so that we can scale and learn from them. And we've been eternally grateful for the amount of learning we've been able to do here.
We'll take our next question from the TRU unit.
Hi, I'm Terrence Mitchell. I'm a mentee in the TRU unit. I have a question. Coming from a level 4, the TRU unit is in level 4, and when you leave the TRU unit, you're back in general pop, like going to a visit or anything. So I know from experience, like COs, they're going from playing cards, and then the next day they could go in GP, work in GP. So is there any work or any thought of the near future of opening TRU prisons instead of TRU units?
TRU prisons?
Yeah, like, we have prisons shutting down in Connecticut, so why not open a prison for a TRU unit prison, so we don't have to worry about the GP vibes when we leave the unit?
Well, hopefully the governor's work carries on and we won't have a lot of 18 to 25-year-olds incarcerated anymore. As far as our little piece of the pie, We do have the new unit that's coming up that will deal with reentry. And for those individuals that have a little bit more time left to do, there's ample opportunities within the unit to stay on the unit, as well as as your level drops, take a look at moving you to another facility that suits your lower level and try to get you opportunities along the way there.
We have time for one more question here from Cheshire.
Hi, my name is Cecil. Thank you for your time. I understand that prison and prisons around Connecticut has a huge business aspect, and I understand that we're trying to attack human dignity and lower the recidivism rates, but I can't not think about tactics that we would use to compensate for the lack of business when recidivism rates go down. So my question is, how do we go about creating incentives or creating job opportunities or just leveling a playing field when we present these ideas to people in political positions so that they are more likely to listen to us when we present these ideas, because it seems to me that they're gonna look at us prisoners as a dollar, as to you guys looking at us prisoners as humans and members of society. That doesn't necessarily compensate for the money that will be lost if recidivism is at zero. So it's just a reality question that I was thinking about.
When are you guys going to talk? All right, thanks. So, again, on a small scale, what we're doing here at Little Cheshire Correctional Institution is, we are actively trying to get more voc ed jobs available. Like I said, my ideology has always been to, you need to prepare somebody for reentry. So, as you know, we've talked about it. We do have a barbering and cosmetology instructor that's in the academy now. I'm trying to obtain another instructor for auto detailing, and even if that doesn't work, we can figure something out with that that we can work on. But you're 100% right. First of all, people out in the world need to be willing to take a chance on hiring, and if that avenue doesn't exist, then we need to get you ready to be entrepreneurs. And there's a lot of successful individuals that have been incarcerated that don't worry about checking that box or don't worry about anything, because all they have to do is decide what they want to do. They put their plan in motion and then they go and attack it and do it. But we need to give you some kind of skills. You asked what I would like to see for the future. I'd like to see more voc ed jobs coming into the institutions, and that's where our money is spent as opposed to anything else, to train and get people ready for going back in. And if entrepreneurship is the way to go and what they feel they need to do, then at least they have that skill. If they don't, then they can go work for someone else, but at least they have a skill. And it's something to back up other than, what could have landed them in the jail in the first place.
I'm going to quickly answer that from a different angle, which is that I think what you're asking about is how we reinvest in communities instead of prisons. And so we have a lot of jobs that come out of prisons. And we have to decide as a community that we no longer want to make money off of Black and brown men and women being incarcerated. Like, that is not going to be how we fuel our economy. There are very few examples of how to do this, but there is one, which is one state that was closing juvenile justice facilities, where they offered those people who worked in those prisons jobs that were unionized, that were for the state, that still had a pension, but might be in Parks and Rec or working for the Department of Forestry. So we have to answer Cecil's questions. We have to figure it out as a community, but yeah, we can't do it anymore on the backs of people.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much, panel. And next, we're going to throw to architect Michael Murphy. He's going to talk about how the built environment can foster change. His recent work includes the incredible Equal Justice Initiative Memorial for Peace and Justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm truly honored to be here. I want to thank Governor Malloy, the Commissioner, thank Warden Semple. I want to thank the amazing folks from Vera who have made this all happen. And of course, I want to thank you all, the residents, who have been so welcoming to have me here. I want to talk a little bit about the role of architecture in the incarceration of our community. I'm an architect, but I'm not an architect because I want to build buildings. I'm an architect because I want to deconstruct them. We spend 90% of our lives inside of buildings. Whether we want to believe it or not, buildings and the way that they're designed, they're intended to shape us. And if they are designed to shape us, then that shaping can do one of two things. It can help us or it can hurt us. Next slide, please. I am part of a nonprofit architectural collective that believes this. It believes that architecture is never neutral. It either helps us or it hurts us. And so it is a moral and a public duty to build, to advocate, and to fight for a built environment that is intended to improve our lives and to improve the lives of our community. Put more politically, I think buildings are an underused mechanism in the fight for justice in our world because if redesigned and rethought, we can seek to use the power of the built environment for a social benefit, to resist isolation, and to fight division. But first, we must build a vocabulary of how to understand these buildings in order to ask for more of them. Buildings are powerful things. Public buildings take a long time to plan. They're expensive and complicated ecosystems to construct. Most importantly, they require the political will to construct them and huge financial resources to pay for them. The architect sits between these forces as a conductor or facilitator, and that architect is forced to manage these often contradictory forces while attempting to advocate for a public benefit. This space around you, this place that we are in, was of course designed by an architect. How did they do, we might ask? Did they use the power that they have to improve the system around you and your lives? Or did they succumb to the inordinate complexities of power that is working within a prison system and leave us to what we have here today? Maybe a more complicated question is, did they use their power to hurt us? I've come to believe that buildings are not just built by those in power, they are those power relationships in built form. And therefore, to change this power structure, we must reconstruct the buildings around us. We must think about each of our built institutions as physical opportunities to protect the public against injury and to resist this wanton abuse of power. Next slide, please. When we look at a hospital, for example, and it is dirty and loud or confusing and hard to navigate, we think so too is the healthcare system, a labyrinth that is impossible to navigate. When we experience a housing project that is falling apart or dangerous and poorly maintained, we think so too is the housing authority, disinterested and indifferent. And when we see a prison that inflicts pain, that isolates people, that strips people of personal space, that makes people afraid of each other, where correctional officers might have 80% turnover rate, and working environments are cold and loud and abusive, where residents are fighting for survival and to keep their minds active from the abuse of boredom, where outdoor time is a chain-link cage designed for caged animals, we must think, too, that the system of incarceration itself is made to make us afraid, to punish us, to insult us, and to belittle us as human beings. These buildings, they are not designed to improve or heal our social ills. They are meant to inflict injury on us as individuals and as a society. As one resident said to me in Angola prison, and Jermaine reinforced just now, if you treat us like animals, put us in a cage like animals, we will act like animals. There is no more obvious example of a space shaping behavior than the architecture of prisons. Next slide, please. The space we are in today is part of a vast architectural landscape that is rarely understood and even less considered an object of study. But these spaces have been designed, either intentionally or unintentionally, to inflict harm on the people around them and within them. Prisons represent our public's moral character and its moral failings. What would it be to instead have spaces that represent our goals for pursuing justice? Places designed for recuperation, for restoration, for reentry, for reflection. What would an ideal work environment be for officers? And how would a space of healing look instead of a space of violence? As James Baldwin has said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Next slide, please. To face the architecture of prisons, we must develop a new spatial vocabulary, a study of the past to inform how we arrive and have arrived at conditions of today. Prison design has always been conceived to shape behavior. The first, most paradigmatic design was from Jeremy Bentham, an English social reformer who conceived the panopticon as a mechanism of behavior control, of surveillance, where incarcerated individuals were subject to the constant gaze of an unseen authority and therefore had to behave obediently. The panopticon creates a feeling of a society that surveils us, and in so doing takes away our individual liberty and throws microphones at us. Quakers took on reform in the 19th century and considered solitary reflection and cloistered isolation as a direct path to spiritual and moral reformation. That translated to the Pennsylvania system at Eastern State, where incarcerated individuals were locked in rows of solitary confinement, isolated so that they could supposedly heal through reflection. Quakers did not predict how social isolation can lead to mental and behavioral implications. As we now know, severe isolation can lead to active delusions and an abjection of self from society. Some have called for spatial isolation to be listed as a form of torture. The Auburn system, a later iteration intended to offset costs and consequences of solitary confinement, was created to allow incarcerated individuals to congregate during working hours on the hall. To accomplish this, notice how the building pulled away from the windows, taking away direct light and views in favor of a cell block that was internalized and 4 stories high. This system became a form of warehousing of people in an environment more like a factory than a center for reform and rebuilding. In the 1960s and 1970s, reformers advocated for a new model where only certain ratios of residents to staff would be allowed. What were called direct supervision prisons in the early 70s attempted to improve conditions of confinement and reduce violence by designing more humane spaces and social gathering areas within the prison. This consideration of the social dynamics of small group settings and more attentive care, as well as isolated treatment areas, reflects current research on behavioral science of group dynamics and collective problem solving. Early evaluation and metrics of this approach were promising, showing improved relationships between staff and residents, reduced vandalism, and an increased sense of safety for both. But of course, the explosion of mass incarceration in the 1970s made it impossible for these facilities to accommodate the rapid increase in scale under these same small but effective ratios. And instead of 1 CO to 25 to 40 residents, the number would double to 1 to 50 and sometimes 1 to 80. The explosion of mass incarceration solidified a form of design abandonment throughout prisons. Next slide, please. There are 2.3 million people incarcerated in the US today, and over 1,800 state and federal correctional facilities operating in the country. To give a scale, to be at Germany levels, we would need to deconstruct over 1,000 prisons in the United States to meet those same levels. The architecture of prisons is not intended for reform or behavioral change anymore. It is built to warehouse as many people as possible. This is a form of anti-design, a system gone awry, where no building could truly keep up with the rate of change these spaces have experienced. We are all in this place to ask ourselves in different ways how we can stop this epidemic, curb our addiction to incarceration, change our policies, test new models of form like with the T.R.U.E. ward, all while protecting the safety of our families and our loved ones. Both those that work in this system and those that are forced to live in it, each of these reforms offers a spatial result. And I hope we leave today asking, if we were to design this system from scratch, what would it look like? What should it look like? Next slide, please. At the core of prison redesign is a question of what we as individuals deserve, what you deserve. I get this a lot. When we design a hospital, I hear from doctors, quote, "We don't need it to be too nice. We just need a place to work and a place that can be cleaned." I hear the same thing when we talk about schools and housing projects. We only have a tiny amount of money, we hear, so let's make it just good enough with our very little resources. And I'm sure you can guess what we hear in incarceration. Not only we don't have the resources, but also the punitive and the jealous, such as these folks don't deserve to live in well-designed places, which again, some have argued, is a type of sensory deprivation, a type of torture itself. Inherent in each of these critiques is the sense that they, whoever they might be, don't deserve good design. That design is something fancy and something extra. The bare minimum might be good enough, we hear. But let me tell you something. I have seen the bare minimum, and it is dangerous, and sometimes it is deadly. And I want us to ask ourselves, what do we deserve in the spaces that we live in, that we work in, that we spend time with our family in, that we get medical care in, and sometimes that we're forced to live in? How do we as human beings deserve to experience space? This is the beginning of dignity construction. A friend of mine has written it more simply: if health is to medicine and justice is to law, then dignity is to design. It is the search for dignity and the calling out of the indignity of our world where we begin to build a small but important spatial vocabulary, and then we begin to construct a built environment that advances fairness, healing, and justice. Both of these images behind me are images of prisons. When the Vera Institute reached out to my firm to reimagine the prison with them, I was initially convinced it wasn't possible within such a broken system. But then, of course, we talked to residents and we met wardens, and the first thing I heard was this very simple point: I am a human being, I may have made mistakes, but all I want to do is feel respected as a person, and I deserve dignity. We've heard the same from staff who have complained about the terrible working conditions, high unemployment, low wages, and behavioral impacts from working in these terrible environments. After this feedback, I knew that such a whole-scale abandonment of the project of rethinking the design of prisons was also a moral abandonment. I've come to conclude after these conversations with residents and staff and families that there may be no greater architectural crisis or architectural responsibility than the redesign of the system of incarceration. To get from this warehouse to this therapy room, both of them prisons, on this slide, is not simply to take what we have and put nicer furniture in it. It begins with asking whether the system itself can be reformed and how it could change with its current configuration. Next slide, please. For those on the far end of the spectrum who believe abolitionism is the only solution, they might talk about correctional processes migrating out of the prison itself and into community centers to carry out local justice strategies within housing blocks, clinics, and schools where social cohesion is strongest and social pressure can enact change. Even in abolitionism, the proposed solution is one dependent on the design of different structures. Next slide. Instead of designing spaces that punish, isolate, and dehumanize, what if we invest in the opportunity to humanely treat and rehabilitate, designing facilities that are exemplary and righteous, in the same way that we approach the design of clinics, housing, schools, and community spaces? Their scale, their materiality, and their spatial character could be therapeutic and affirming with programs that invest in human dignity and the reintegration into society. What if the facility itself aimed to improve the relationships between all of us, between residents, officers, victims, and communities, reshaping how our society perceives criminal justice and incarceration? Next slide, please. In a reimagined prison, the ratio of residents to employees becomes a primary variable for success or failure. Studies of group dynamics consistently show that lower group sizes improve outcomes. Second, we consider the day in the life of the resident. The design of a resident's day should encourage choice and self-actualized activities rather than the sensory deprivation that comes with perpetual boredom. A third variable is how much time is spent collectively working on shared responsibilities. We must open opportunity for group learning environments, kitchens where people cook together, and activities that integrate the outside and the inside. In each of these cases, the building responds to, pushes against the systemic abuse of a warehouse-like prison. Next slide, please. The fourth element is where we locate these facilities and in what communities they may emerge. The prison is a foreign place for many. It is designed to be an unimaginable, terrifying, and mysterious place for those beyond its walls. A reimagined space could be located intentionally, connected to the community and the networks that it supports. Designed to be intertwined with a community's social fabric to increase transparency, faith, and compassion in our public systems. If a reimagined facility is understood as a place of healing, could a prison itself be a catalyst in radical decarceration? Could it lead to a healthier society for us all? We have seen some of these ideas working in Europe, and we can look to them for guidance. But for us to begin in America, we must first address the moral question of the society we want to live in. And we must ask what we as individuals deserve and what we would expect for our own sense of dignity if we too found ourselves inside. Finally, the process of this design is essential, and only those that truly know this system can give us the guidance to reimagine it. Next slide, please. At the Otisville State Prison, we worked with the amazing Boz Dressinger and her students from the Prison to College Pipeline at John Jay School of Criminal Justice. Thank you all for watching. We asked them if they could design their space into something else. What would they design it into? And they chose a university, a place to educate and to learn, to fill their day, and to work together. These drawings are from that exercise. These residents designed spaces for self and for privacy, safe showers and bathrooms, rooms and places for reflection and humanity. There were spaces for community gathering and collective learning, classrooms and auditoriums where both residents and staff could take courses together. There were cafeterias and canteens to break bread, and in one case, make bread to sell to outside customers. There were also spaces for work and collective labor. In one example, where you can see here on the bottom left, in the middle, one resident designed a prison around a working farm and its locations for planting and growing food, for healthy eating, and for harvesting crops. Spaces for safety kept resurfacing in these conversations. Freedom from harm was a design problem for the participating students. They preferred spaces where a commitment to rules and general guidelines was trusted in design, and when rules were broken, offenders were dealt with but not banished. The students advocated for some ability to guard against injury or violence within these spaces intended for safety. In the creative sketch, I was pointing to this working farm. Independent living areas and cooperative environment was the solution for the space. And I loved how responsible and thoughtful it was. It was a microcosm of what our society could be. Next slide, please. For too long, we have witnessed how the architecture of prisons has hurt people's lives. It has also hurt our society. But if architecture can hurt, it can also heal. The T.R.U.E model here at Cheshire and the initiatives and conversations started by all of you participating and listening today give me hope that a reimagined facility is not only possible, no system is too broken to discredit our moral responsibility to invest in the dignity of every individual life. As one of these students explained to me, educational spaces gave them hope, and having hope was a weapon for survival. My colleague and friend Brian Stevenson tells us that hopelessness is the enemy of justice. And for the future of the prison, the investment in beauty is this investment in hope, because justice is not possible without beauty. For us as designers, as architects, as citizens, for us, justice, it is beauty. Thank you very much.
We're going to go back to New York now, where we're going to learn how we might scale that vision.
How are you all doing? Thank you so much. Thank you to Vera, to this panel, and to the incredible group of folks assembled in Connecticut. I just want to get us started. I'm Candace Jones, the president and CEO of the Public Welfare Foundation, and I am joined today by an incredible panel. Alex Frank, who is a mastermind, master builder, architect behind the work that you're seeing in Connecticut, but goes simply by the program director of Restoring Promise at the Vera Institute. Deanna, who is the president of Just Leadership USA and giving voice to so many in the work going on nationwide. Andy Potter, who is working in the Corrections Union in Michigan and leading some important conversation is going to keep us very honest today, and Rick Ramish, who runs the Department of Corrections for Colorado. How are you all doing? Welcome. The first thing I want to do, Alex, is give you an opportunity. You came up a ton in the panel at Cheshire, and I love that sweet, sweet Warden Urfy said that you guys just had a little miscommunication. So do you want to respond to that? Talk a little bit about the challenges of getting everybody on the same page in the beginning.
Sure, and hi Urfy. I don't know where the camera is, but I'm waving. And hello to the T.R.U.E unit. I miss you guys. I feel weird being here and not being with you, but this is such an exciting opportunity and space to occupy. I feel really privileged to be here. You know, the thing about T.R.U.E and the partnership with Connecticut is we were breaking new ground, right? Like no one really knew exactly what the path should look like. And so it was a shared learning experience for everyone. We walked in with some lessons learned from the youth justice reform movement in the US, you know, the mistakes that have been made, the things that have gone well. And Urfy, you know, I credit him so much because of his experience with the department. And the 3 of us, the 2 of us, the 10 of us, the 50 of us had to learn together. And we had to do that while also being vigilant about setting a really high bar about what are our goals really. Our goals being that we want to transform the prison system, right? But we're not trying to just make prisons great again or anything like that. We're trying to, you know, we're trying to set a whole new standard for what we think about when we think about justice. We want to think about racial equity. We want to support the village that already exists but has been ignored. And we want to do that in partnership with incarcerated people and with staff, and that's hard and complex. And I credit them so much for being our partners and taking the leap of faith with us.
Andy, you know how hard it can be in this work to include both the individuals impacted but also staff. Talk a little bit about the work going on in Michigan and how you guys have been dealing with that and the challenges there of getting everybody to be a part of the transformation.
Well, I think some of it was talked about earlier. The way our system is set up is there's an automatic divide in there. And to bring officers to the table when Michigan, like other states, are doing great work with reform, the officers aren't seeing themselves inside of this enough, and they don't feel like they have skin in the game enough to buy into the reforms and to play a role in it. They feel a little bit like they want to be involved, but they're so short-staffed that if they leave their partner alone, then they're going to be ostracized. So I think there has to be something that looks at this. All of us, I think, have a responsibility to keep an eye out for those blind spots, and I think some of these things are the blind spots.
Deanna, before you were president of Just Leadership, I'm gonna keep saying that because I like the way it sounds. Before you were the president of Just Leadership USA, in your incredible life cycle, you have both been in custody and been a custodian, which I think is extraordinary. Talk a little bit about how you think, based on your respective roles, you can start to deal with the tensions between people who are in facilities and people who are in facilities, right? Which are staff and human beings that are in custody.
Thanks, Candace. I think one of the unique positions that I've had is being an individual who was served time, but also going back to work inside a maximum security facility as a case manager. What I realized was there was no incorporation of human dignity for the staff looking at individual serving time, but also from staff from administration. One of the things that I always said was that prisons are traditionally built in rural areas, and the prison becomes the economic viability in those areas. The correctional staff does not resemble the population being supervised. And a lot of times that plays a major role. And even being a case manager, I always said that treating the individual with human dignity got me ostracized by my colleagues, because then I became an offender lover, but I was treating people with human dignity the way I wanted to be treated. But again, you had to go up against your colleagues in that manner as well. So from just leadership perspective, one of the things we haven't done well in correctional systems, and I still don't know how I was able to go back and work with a criminal background, but one of the things we have not been focusing on is having directly impacted individuals in those positions, kind of what you've seen as the mentoring. There are hundreds of individuals who have been successful once they left prison or a correctional facility. They have master's degrees. We have individuals at Johns Hopkins working on a cure for diabetes, but we're still not respected in a correctional field that we play a pertinent role. And we have that saying that those closest to the problem are closest to the solution, but furthest from resource and power. And it's time to put people who are the experts about this at the table when you're making decisions.
Rick, we're having a conversation here on this panel about scale. You run a significantly sized statewide system. How do you start to get some of the things we've talked about today, human dignity, the conversations happening between people incarcerated and staff at facilities, how do you start to get that at scale?
Well, one, I think, keep it in proper perspective, which is we lead the nation in segregation reform. And to do that, there was a lot of talk about culture, and I get a lot of questions on how do you change culture. To me, it's not as much culture as it is leadership. We have a great staff, and I say we've just been teaching them the wrong things. And now it's up to us to teach them the right things. And when I talk about leadership, I just don't mean people in my position. I mean leadership from the ground level on up to my position has to be totally dedicated to pushing these things forward, and that's the only way you're gonna get it to work. And then, of course, the obvious, as we all know as leaders and managers, that there has to be a tremendous amount of staff input. Even if they disagree with you, they've got to have that forum. What I say is, Henry Ford was attributed to this. Some say yes, some say no, but he was once asked, what would the people ask you for? And his response was faster horses. And what I mean by saying that is that sometimes you just have to say, this is where we're going, but I need your help on how we're going to get there, but I guarantee this is where we're going.
Alex, we've heard a lot of questions today coming from the audience here in Connecticut about scale. Why aren't we having true facilities? People want us to foreshadow what's next. Can you talk to us a little bit about what's next, that this isn't gonna be the exception, but we wanna see if we can push this country towards making it the rule? And also, I know that you were boots on the ground in Connecticut, really working with the team there to build the kind of individualized unit that was responsive to them. So how do you scale and not lose those important factors?
So, I'll talk a little bit about the initiative as a whole. Restoring Promise is sort of it's the initiative that is working directly with jurisdictions all across the country to make this idea of reimagining prison real. And Connecticut, the Cheshire T.R.U.E unit, is the first place, the place that blazed the trail for others to follow. But the next place was a jail in Massachusetts, and the Worth unit, the women's prison unit, also in Connecticut. And then we also this year partnered with the South Carolina Department of Corrections. And I have to say, they have taken up this work, and doing this work in the South is obviously very different than doing it in a place like Connecticut or Massachusetts. And they have been incredible partners and blazed the trail for folks in the South to take this up, and have very quickly, from the onset, wanted to think of this as a statewide initiative. And so for the first time, we are opening 2 units simultaneously across 2 different prisons with young adults, one group that has about under 4 years on their sentence, and another group that has an average of about 20-year sentences. And so we are trying and testing this idea of how do you go from an initial pilot unit, which I think it's important to start small. That's where the learning happens. We don't want to project an idea that we're coming in with a program and that gets implemented. This is not about a program. This is about a process. This is about a movement that's getting ignited. And so the start of that movement begins with the partnership with the people most impacted, the line staff who work in the facilities and the incarcerated people that live there. And right now, today, our staff are down in South Carolina. We have a partner organization called MILPA. It's based in California. They are founded and run by formerly incarcerated people and have been our key participants and partners in this entire initiative. They're in the South Carolina prisons today, training the mentors, preparing them for this movement. And we've got our staff who are in with other, with staff who work for DOC, preparing them to open their units. And they're not here with us today because they are boots on the ground right now, today, doing this work.
Shout out to the South Carolina team. It's one thing to be here talking about it, it's another thing to be there doing it.
They're handling it. And that's the thing about scale, is we have been in awe of the jurisdictions that have been willing to take this risk and this leap of faith, and I don't take that lightly. We have a lot of privilege when we have the door open for us and asked to walk into a facility. It's harder to do this work inside prisons, right? It's harder to create a simulcasted event, to be able to partner with the people inside, but that's what's happening. We also know that the path to scale also relies on a few core things. We've heard about global learning. We can't claim to be able to think outside the box unless we're willing to go outside of it as well. And so we've done a lot of work internally to think about how we can learn from our global partners and take those lessons and be inspired and be moved by that. That is a key ingredient to this entire initiative. The other piece is about changing the narrative. I think the narrative in this country is so anchored around shows like Lock Up and Oz, and we need a new narrative to be put out into the world about justice reform. And of course, I can't say this enough, we have to do it in partnership with the people most impacted. And that's harder, but it has to be the priority.
Deanna, so much of what we've seen with T.R.U.E is focused on young adults. They've just worked with the Worth facility that they're expanding to, but you also have thought a lot about individualized treatment nationwide, and also what specifically is needed for women who are incarcerated. What do you think about that? What do you think we need to do to scale programming to make sure that it's individualized and also gender responsive?
So one of the things when we talk about women have unique needs. We have left our children are a part of the system. Very few prisons even include parenting with women who were incarcerated while they were pregnant. Definitely don't talk about when women are delivering and shackled during the delivery process and your baby being stripped from you immediately after you deliver it, possibly never to see it again. Even with the systems of child services, that there's a process in some states that if the mother is not reunified with the child within a year, the child is eligible to go up for adoption. Well, where does that stand with a mother who has a 2 to 3 year sentence? So some of the things we are not talking about that are kind of radical like this. But again, within facilities, I don't think it's so much gender specific, it's just base human dignity. Once you look at the person, once you see the person sitting on the other side of that desk from you as human, you then respond to them as human. As long as you don't see them as a human being worthy, you give them the treatment you feel that they're worth at that time. So I was sharing in the back, our facilities were never built for rehabilitation. I remember when I went to work at the correctional facility in Indiana, and my first walking in, it was a range, 4 stories high, individual cells, and they were doing shakedowns. And men were handcuffed in their underwear, dogs barking, cells being tossed, and it literally reminded me of human cattling, animalistic behavior, and then we expect individuals to have some human dignity or respond a certain way after we've cattled them in this manner. So it really is not about gender specific. If we see people as human, their gender doesn't matter.
Rick, with the Mandela rules, you dealt with and worked a lot on human dignity. Can you talk about what those rules are and how you work to implement them in the system that you're running in Colorado?
Yeah, I had the great honor of working with the State Department before the UN on promoting and rewriting the standard rules for internationally for inmates around the world, and it became very clear very early that the Mandela rules, and they were called the Mandela rules, which was a brilliant move because one of the main meetings was held in Cape Town, South Africa. But the difference to me became very, very clear between America and the international rules. The Mandela rules basically are centered on human rights. American prison policies are centered around civil rights, and there's a huge difference, meaning that civil rights typically are what forces us by the courts or the legislature to follow certain rules that are not humanizing to those that are brought into our custody. And so that's the importance of the Mandela rules. And I might add, because I have the opportunity, because I have the mic right here, is that
I've got one too, Rick.
I'll be real blunt, because it hasn't been said. It's been inferred. What I talk about are prisons in Colorado. Not one prison in Colorado was built to handle those that are sent to us. And I believe just by their physical structure, they manufacture violence. And that has to be changed. And I'm not sure America has the courage to do that, but I talk about coming up on a highway in Colorado, Canyon City, where we have a cluster of 6 prisons. When you come up on top of the hill, you see concrete monsters. And if I was on a prison bus and saw those monsters, two things would run through my mind. I'd either be scared to death, or I'd be thinking, I gotta be the meanest, baddest mother that ever comes out of there alive. And that causes them to react in a way that we don't want them to react. And it obviously, there's nothing that you think about when you see those monsters sitting there thinking, God, I'm gonna learn a lot of good things here. It just doesn't happen.
I appreciate you saying that, because I think in your position, that level of honesty and frankness is incredible. Andy, one of the things I would always say a time ago when I spent some time in and around corrections was, if you really want the truth and an understanding of what's possible, go sit in the staff lounge. And what are you hearing when you're talking to staff about what they think is possible, what terrifies them? One of the things that came up in the question in Connecticut was closure and reinvestment and what that means. What do you think about that part of the conversation?
I think when you talk about reform and when a prison closes, like in Michigan, we've closed a number of prisons, it should be a celebration, and it's not, for those who work there and for the community. Like myself, I grew up in a rural area and my options were limited. And you were either going to work for Oldsmobile, which is closed, or you were going to work in some factory or corrections. And that was in the 80s, so there was a boom. So it was what we did for a humble living. And we didn't take the job for any other reason. But so when that prison closes, and we're left to just fend for ourselves, basically, I think it gives officers a bad taste, and I think we have to address that as well. I lead an initiative, One Voice, that's done an economic impact study. So when a prison closes, there's a pipeline for folks, so they don't look at it as devastating as they could otherwise. And I also think in some ways, when we talk about reform, there's a lot of attention that's given to the programming, and those officers feel left behind. So there's a little animosity there. There's a little, that wedge is even deeper, and the rules that are set up around it, the overfamiliarization and everything else creates this wall. So those officers can't feel like reform is about them as well. They're just being told it's going to change, and it's scary to them. And that's what One Voice is. It's about bringing them together with all the stakeholders and say, you do play a role in this. We do want you to be a part of this, and it has to make sense for everybody.
Deanne, I see you wanting to get in the conversation. We only have a little bit of time. I could do this with you guys for 4 hours, but I want to get a quick round robin, and then I'm going to end with you, Alex. But Deanna, I actually want you to, I know you want to respond a little bit to what Andy said, but also talk about reentry. It's come up a lot. The scale needs of people to have something, even the promise of something while they're still in facility, that there'll be something waiting for them upon return. So can you talk a little bit about those needs?
I do, and I do want to respond because I was itching. Because when we say, I think language is important, so when we talk about reform, it's talking about trying to figure out a way to fix something, right? And I know our criminal justice, but what we're talking about with Vera is something radical, dismantling the current state. And I can't imagine 4 slaves getting in the cabin saying, how do we reform slavery? We dismantle it and move forward. So I think we need to really start looking outside that box. But when we talk about reentry, and I remember the guys were talking about it, a lot of times, again, we focus on programming, but individuals inside facilities is a fundamental responsibility for organizations to go in and instill hope of what the possibility is. A lot of times there's not a smooth handoff from corrections to the community, or individuals don't even know what to dream about once they leave prison. So I think when I worked at DOJ with Second Chance, we were really being forceful about what that looks like. How do you make that continuity of care for programmings that are being funded but aren't going inside the prison system? And one of the issues we ran into, especially with our mentoring program, was that people with backgrounds couldn't get in to provide that actual connection and services and hope. If you bring hope to an individual, you have the ability to change the concept of their life.
Rick, how do you end mass incarceration? He asked me to ask it. I said, if you want me to ask that, I'll definitely ask that to the head of corrections
and
in Colorado.
I have the answer very quickly. I had the opportunity to visit the Swedish prison system a few years ago. Nils Oberg, the director there, he has everything. So what we would consider the county jails, the state prisons, the federal prisons, it's all under his umbrella. Sweden has a population of 10.3 million people. They have less than 5,000 people incarcerated. In Colorado, we have a population of about 5.4 million people. I have 20,000 inmates. Now, I tell people I've met a lot of nice Swedes when I was over there, and I did, but they weren't nicer than Coloradoans. And the point is this country, you heard Germany being mentioned a number of times. The difference between European prisons and their countries and us is they invest in corrections and America invests in efficiency. And so the staffing in European prisons is very close to 1-to-1. Imagine who the mentor is versus ours staffing, which is outrageous. But to answer the question, and I've been talking about this for decades, and obviously nobody's been listening. We like to pound our fists and talk about unfunded mandates. The largest unfunded mandate out there is counties sending people from their communities to the state prison system, which has made us the largest mental health system in our state, the largest drug and alcohol treatment in our facilities in our state. And until those counties are charged for us about $36,000 per year to send someone to the state prison system, they're going to keep sending them. But how about this? How about if they don't send them, we take, as a state, a portion of that $36,000 and send it back to them, give that to them for front-end treatment, which we know is much more successful, all the data proves that, than sending someone to prison.
Alex, before they cut Rick loose on the world, what's your hope for this program, the potential for where we're going in the next couple years?
Our hope for Restoring Promise is to work in as many states and jurisdictions as will have us. We have an ambitious goal with that, and last year we put out a request for letters of interest for states to apply, and to our surprise at that time there were 7 jurisdictions, and that's how South Carolina ended up being selected in the one coveted spot. Our hope and ambition, like I said, is to reimagine justice and to rethink our system of incarceration by focusing on transforming conditions of confinement. And we want to go from the 3 states that we are working with to, hopefully 10 states, 20 states, 50 states. Quickly, we want to do that by prioritizing global learning. We want to build the evidence, and the way that we're doing that, I want to shout out Ryan, hey, is by also upending the way that we approach research in the first place. That research has historically been done on people, not with people. And we have, Ryan has sort of been the architect of this idea of doing prison-based collaborative research in this radically different way. The idea of supporting the village is something that MILPA has really challenged us to think about, and the way that we invest our time and energy in supporting the village that does exist, both the people who are in prison right now and the people on the outside, their families, their communities, and everyone involved and impacted by the justice system, line staff too. We believe that the global learning component, the trip that's happening later this month, is critical. We need to think way outside the box about how we approach this, and think deeply about our commitment to racial equity in the context of justice reform.
I love that you talk about Ryan. Ryan on the panel earlier talked a little bit about vulnerability in Cheshire, and as I understand what actually happened is early on in the experience, Ryan didn't just get emotional, she ugly cried. And mentors and participants of the program actually had to talk her off the wall, bless her heart. But she's still contributing so much to the world and the work, and she's gonna kill me if she ever could get her hands on me again. But I want to commend Vera as well. So many of the people on this panel, which I think is incredible, have worked as much on ending mass incarceration as they have on the transformation of what's happening in custody. And what I think is really powerful about what Vera is doing is that they are not making the work of justice reform at the expense of the millions of people who are in custody now and today. There are not generations of people that are currently in bondage that we can sacrifice in our move for the future. And I think that's what's so transformational about this conversation and the work that you guys are doing. So with that, we're gonna take questions. And our first question is actually coming from Connecticut. Is there someone there in Connecticut that has a question for this panel? Hopefully not Ryan.
Oh, I have many questions for you, Candace. And I'm going to see you Sunday, so get your running shoes ready for Sunday. We have our first question here. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Tyler. I would like to thank Diana for bringing up the question of children being stripped away from mothers, because that's a question that I have as a father myself of a 6-year-old. Every day I'm in this program and I think about my child and his development, and that disconnect that we have with each other because I'm not able to see him right now. I haven't seen my son in about 16 months, and that's the hardest thing for me as an individual, is to not see the child that I gave life to. Excuse me, my emotions is because I get emotional when I talk about my child. My son is the most important thing to me, and like you pinpointed out, that children have been stripped away from mothers at birth, and I feel as though we need to create a system where that won't happen, because we have fathers as well, like myself, that may not be able to see their children because of restriction. I did the court system thing where I had to stand in front of a judge and fight for my own son to see my own child. That was the biggest, hardest thing I ever had to do in my life, was to explain to a judge why I should be able to see my own child. The thing that I'm trying to get to is, how can we create a system where, put into play immediately, that doesn't happen to fathers or mothers, where you could have that connection with your own child, because that's pivotal in a child's development, is that connection with their parents. You know what I'm saying? I don't have that connection with my child right now because I'm disconnected from him. So my question is, what could we do? What could we really do to connect children back with their families and their parents?
Deanna, and then maybe Rick, would you also respond?
Yes. Thank you for being honest and sharing that very emotional statement. I think one of the things when we talk about directly impacted people and organizing on the ground, we always look for solutions at a federal level or for elected officials, but actually working on the ground with our own office and Department of Children's Services, building those coalitions to actually demand and understand what are the federal rules, and that the majority of the rules that are locally implemented are just that, locally implemented on top of what the federal rules are. So actually organizing and building coalitions and really questioning and challenging, is this about actually punishing a child, or is this truly about family reunification, when research shows that a child with an incarcerated parent has increased their chances of being incarcerated themselves?
Yeah, a couple of things. Those that are familiar with large bureaucracies like the prison system, you know that we have rules and regulations and manuals that are about that thick. And typically what happens when one bad thing happens, everybody gets punished. That's what bureaucracies do. We've tried to adopt the philosophy in Colorado that if there's an individual that causes a problem, let's deal with the individual and not punish everybody. So we have a couple of different programs going. One I'll talk about, it's called Parents on a Mission. And it stresses the fact that just because you're incarcerated doesn't mean that you are a bad father. And it's a lengthy program, and it culminates with contact visitation and getting them reconnected back with their children and family, and we stress that. The other is that we're going through a process now of giving tablets to those in our custody. And the reason I bring this up is because with those tablets, there will be basically phone capabilities, but probably more important is video contact capabilities, where when we initially started the program, we had fathers, or one father in particular comes to mind, who had has a daughter out of state that for the first time was able to visualize having a conversation with her, and it was a very, very touching, emotional thing. So, you know, we get the fact that the more contact people can have with their families, the better off everybody is, but it gets into what this whole thing was about today, which is humanizing our policies and procedures.
I want to go here with a question.
Sure. Hi, my name is Chelsea Homeland, and I'm with the Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives, and we're working to bring business into this conversation and what that looks like, obviously from a reentry perspective, but a political perspective, variety of things. So I just wanted to ask if there were specific things, just practically, from the business community that you felt were really missing, and that what specifically would you ideally want?
Are you a plant? That's a fantastic question.
I'm not.
From the Chamber of Commerce. What can business do, panel?
Yeah.
What can business be doing here?
Well, from a reentry standpoint, definitely adopting fair hiring practices, which I know the Chamber is working on with DOJ on getting employers to adopt fair hiring policies and ensuring that we're actually hiring individuals who have criminal backgrounds. But not only are we hiring individuals to stimulate the economy, but not segregating them that we have a program. No, that we're actually evaluating them based on knowledge, skills, and abilities for the best person to do the job within the context of what their background is. So definitely bringing businesses to the table, but also businesses stimulate the local economy when you start talking about political. So money plays a role. So if you have Fortune 500 companies who are willing to get in this conversation to say, this is what we want our money in our region where we pay our taxes for our business to have an impact on.
Love that. Anyone else on businesses?
Yeah, you know, it's all about jobs.
Yeah.
And take some time to go into the institutions and pre-hire. We're having that done in Colorado. The unemployment rate is so low right now that people are having trouble finding employees, and we will provide you with who you need. If you need welders, we'll give you welders. If you need carpenters, we'll give you carpenters. I mean, we have that resource, and you know, come in and visit us and tell us what you need, and we're going to provide it for you. And it doesn't have to wait till they're out of the facility. It can be done before they're released.
I'm also the worst moderator ever because I'm going to add something. Nick's never going to have me do anything else. But businesses contribute to the business model in facilities. So commissary, phones, some of the services that are there and gouging, having business leaders advocate to make sure that those services are fair and at cost would be incredible.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Hi over there, John Jay, colleagues. It's great to be here. My name is Boz Dreisinger. I am a professor at John Jay College and the founding academic director of the Prison to College Pipeline Program. And I think in the history of panels, there has never been a better panel title than this one, because I saw it was labeled as the future. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the future. And I have to say, having spent the day with the people on this panel and knowing one of them a lot more than a day, if the future is these individuals, then I want the future yesterday. So we have a lot of great things to talk about. So let me start by asking everyone on the panel to introduce yourself. Who are you? And tell us a little bit about your educational journey.
Well, my name is Abbas Muhammad. I'm 24 years old. I'm a mentee in the T.R.U.E program as well as a student in the Wesleyan program. And my journey with education, I think, started very young. I came to the U.S. at the age of 5. You know, I've been trying to learn the culture, the language, how to survive in America. And because of the conditions of being in an urban neighborhood, I find myself in prison today, gaining a college education, which is, you know, both a gift and a curse. And I think it kind of shows, in a way, that maybe society failed me in a way.
Say more about that gift and the curse.
I mean, I'm sitting right now in prison. I'm learning certain skills that I should have learned in the world, that I should have learned in school growing up. Skills about towards being having a better character, and I think that's something that we're missing.
And tell us, what do you mean when you say that exactly? How do you feel that you were failed, that you shouldn't have been getting your education at this stage of the game as opposed to before?
I mean, I'm sitting here at 24 years old. I'm missing a large part of my life, all because I made a mistake when I was younger. This could have been, you know, most likely prevented if in high school or in middle school they had something that was geared more towards, you know, better training than your youth into making better choices.
And what do you tell us about your studies? What are you interested in? What's your vision?
Well, right now I'm getting a degree in associates from the Wesleyan program, but upon my release, I want to get a bachelor's in film studies. I'm interested in film. I want to start my own production company, and, you know, hopefully even help brothers like myself and Tan, when they come home, hire them to play in my scripts, play in my films, and give them a career.
Beautiful. Rob.
Yeah, my name is Robert Bullock. I say my journey in education in the past really came from me being autodidactic at first and going through my own personal self-discovery. But then once I got into the Wesleyan program, I would say that it really sort of helped me to enhance my critical thinking. It allowed me to develop time management, to better learn how to articulate myself, and also to create a vision. And that vision came with, you know, being able to earn an associate's degree. And I'm just cultivating that vision now.
And what are you studying? And where do your interests lie?
Oh, so my interest lies in investing, stocks, bonds, finance. I like economics. So that was a lot of the material that I was reading on my own at first. And anytime Wesleyan offers classes like that, I take it.
And behind the scenes, so we've all been chopping it up this whole time, and you talked a little bit about why you're so interested in studying finance and what that means as part of your larger vision when you come home. Can you share that with us?
Yes. I feel like in schools around the country, we're not taught about financial literacy. So a lot of us are coming into prison, and now we're starting to learn about credit. You know, we're learning about mortgages. And I feel like, you know, if we're gonna be creating workers, a lot of times they're creating workers from school. And if you don't know these basic, you know, economic principles, and, you know, like, how are you gonna really, like, create a life for yourself?
And you spoke just now, too, about the critical thinking skills and all of the other skills that you're attaining by becoming a college student in the context of prison. How else do you see your time as a student, as an incarcerated student, shaping who you are, changing who you are?
Oh, that's a tough one. I would say first and foremost, I'm a black man. So I take that as my identity also. And when it comes to education, I think I come from a culture that values education because it offers mobility, right? And how it's shaping my identity is to realize that I'm in an oppressive situation. And it's not just me that's in an oppressive situation, it's oppressive for a lot of people that's in here. So I would say that it's shaping my identity to help me to find better solutions to the problems that I'm gonna face and the challenges going on.
So, hello? Yeah, so my name is Devon Simmons. I'm actually the first graduate from John Jay's Prison to College Pipeline. I started the program in 2012 while I was incarcerated at Otisville Correctional Facility. And I was released at the end. Actually, yesterday made 4 years since my release. And yeah. And you know,
you have to tell them how you honored that day.
Yeah, so I'd be remiss if I did not shout out President Mason because she makes sure that she always acknowledged me, and I actually got my pen and I got my diploma yesterday, rather my degree, right? So now I'm actually the second person to have a bachelor's degree. So I have 2 degrees, and I'm just ecstatic to be here, and I'm really happy that President Mason acknowledged me in that way, because if you could only hear, for the folks back in New York, if you could only hear the applause that happened, like that was very beautiful for me, because I don't feel that prisons are designed to build self-efficacy. And for the brothers to see me be able to come home and navigate reentry and actually go to college and acquire not 1 but 2 degrees, and travel all around the world, I think that is very motivational for them. So I just want to say thank you.
So of course, Devon knows I'm not going to let him off that easily. Can you take us through a little bit of your educational journey from pre-prison to college pipeline to being what you are now as an esteemed college graduate?
So my educational journey started with a lie. My mother lied to the Board of Education and said we reside in a different school district. So I was able to go to school in an affluent school district as opposed to the bad school district that I lived in. And with that, I always took interest in education because it allowed me to be in a setting which wasn't so tense. I didn't have to look around my shoulder when I was downtown in school, but when I got back uptown and was in the projects, it was a whole different ball game. And unfortunately, by the time I became a teenager, I caught a couple of cases, and then 4 weeks before my high school graduation, I was arrested and ultimately sentenced to 18 years. And my first year upstate, I actually got my GED. However, due to the Violent Crime Act bill, there was no access to higher education for me, so it wouldn't be until 12 years later when I was transferred to Otisville Correctional Facility when the opportunity presented itself for me to enter the prison college pipeline. So when that thing finally came into fruition, I took it and ran with it because I know the importance of education, and now I can officially say that my undergrad journey is done. I view education as a tool to literally take me all around the world. You know, I've now become a global ambassador for education, and working to help replicate prison to college pipeline programs in England, Jamaica, South Africa, and hopefully Cuba as well. So I'm honored to be here and show you brothers that y'all have an opportunity to make it out of here and go to university as well, and it's not over for you.
And just one more follow-up for you, Devon. I'm going to ask you the same thing that I asked Rob, which is how do you see your education in the context of prison and then post-prison? How do you see that as having shaped you as the human being that you are?
Well, I learned specifically through going to college. I thought everything, I had black and white thinking. So I would only read nonfiction books. But then once I started to read literary texts that were not true in the academic setting, learning that I can learn from things that were fictional in the power of the arts, it really shaped my mind to see the importance of the humanities. And with that, I actually think about how, like, if I can become a loving person and love myself to the point where I can love others, then I would be able to take the next steps in my life without dwelling on my past. So ultimately, it allowed me to forgive myself for all the shortcomings I've had in my life and move forward.
I like those words, love and forgiveness, as intersections with education. Rashad.
My name is Rashad Porter. I'm 26. I'm a father, veteran, student at John Jay. I'm a falling junior where I study political science, and I'm also a researcher at the Vera Institute.
And tell us a little bit about both the work that you do at Vera, what that entails, and also your path to coming to John Jay.
It's funny, I came to work at Vera through internship that I got put in contact with from a professor who I had a good rapport with. And before that, I remember graduating high school, I was like, oh no, school's not for me. But it took for me to get to a point in my life where it's like, oh, this is important. Like, this opens up so many doors for me. And I have a newfound affinity for education. And being around, like, these brainiacs like Ryan and Alex, just, they inspire me to do more. These people on this panel, these people I'm here with, all inspire me.
Your major, you had told me, is political science. And why'd you choose that major, and what's your vision with it going forward?
I chose political science because I wanted to affect change in a way that felt real, that I could reach as many people as possible. I can recall a time where I was a young man, my friends and I would sit around and we would talk about issues in our community, and that's where it would stop. Now that I'm here, I'm in school, I have an opportunity to have these conversations with people with decision-making power, so I just want to hold true to that.
And on that note, I'm going to ask you something, and then we can go around and you can all weigh in on this. What do you see as the relationship between education and this movement to end mass incarceration? How do you see these things intersecting?
I think that raising awareness and for people to be educated about the things that are happening and how it affects them and contextualizing their experience in the context of mass incarceration. Like, I have family members who are incarcerated. You know, it doesn't just affect me. It doesn't just affect me. It affects us all as a community. And with this many people being closed off from opportunities to pursue education, it affects us not only as a people, but, you know, as a nation.
Yeah, and my saying is, if you knew better, you do better, right? So if we're gonna put people in prison, like, we need to be teaching them while they're in there. And it was really important for me to graduate with a 3.9 GPA because it only highlights that we're not going to universities because of some charity case. We have intellectual stimulation to bring to the table as well, because we could do policy, we could read the literary text, we could do research. So it's not until brothers like y'all get on campus to actually shape the next field of policymakers, judges, lawyers, that we're actually going to make a huge impact on changing the ways in which they think.
And do you see, both of you, round of applause, sorry, I stopped that round of applause. Both of you are John Jay students, former John Jay student, but always a John Jay student at heart. How do you see that climate of change and justice and sort of forward thinking? Do you see that present in your classes on campus?
Most definitely. A lot of our conversations are centered around the same things that we're discussing here on this panel. Justice reform, what does that look like? What can we do? How can we become active? There's a lot of young people organizing and doing things in the community.
I had to do a lot of teaching while at John Jay, teaching people the importance of language, teaching people the ways in which they're impacted by the criminal justice system, because just because you're a correction officer or police officer doesn't mean that you don't have a loved one or you're living in an area which is like basically has the omnipresence of the police. So you're impacted by the criminal justice system as well. But I do have hope for them because they're really progressive in the ways that they're thinking, and I think we're going to get there eventually.
Well, you're talking about an education that's going both ways, right? You all are bringing gifts to the campus in terms of educating others. It's not only a one-way process by any means, right? What do you guys think about this intersection, as far as intersection between ending mass incarceration, this movement to end mass incarceration, and education and the role that education plays?
So the same thing that Rashad said is that education, you have to educate the public also, because a lot of times, the public is misinformed. So they have like this belief of not really considering the context. So a lot of us come from different contexts, but those contexts, like Jermaine said, is, sometimes they're violent, sometimes we're victims. And when you talk about education for me and reimagining justice, then I have a new value. I like learning. So that means that I'm embracing change. So I think that's how education can really play a factor, is that it's talking about changing something. And when we're talking about reimagining justice, we're talking about changing a prison structure that hasn't benefited nobody, especially black and brown. So.
And just for the record, he was slipping me notes about Dostoevsky, trying to pick my brain as an English professor about crime and punishment while this is all going on, as a statement of his commitment to learning. Abbas?
Well, yeah, I think that education allows us, to make better choices in life. And so moving forward, if we were able to better educate our younger ones or our same people from our neighborhoods, maybe they'll be able to make better decisions even despite the obstacles they still have to face. I think education buys you options. Maybe after I get out, it allows me to have a better choice at getting employment, at finding a job, and
moving forward from there. I mean, I think also, though, for the three of you, it must be exhausting on some level being a walking breaker of stereotypes. And I know, Devon, we've talked quite a bit about that. Does it ever do you ever feel that exhaustion where I just want to be a regular student, I don't want to have to be the thing that's proving everybody's stereotype wrong?
Yes, but I think a lot of times the professors that come inside this prison, they treat us as students. That within itself is just for me, is good. So when you're talking about the stereotype, it is only really from those that's uneducated, and that they're just looking at me as an inmate and they're not looking at me as a student. So these professors just coming in here, they're sharing ideas with me. They're teaching me how to, interpret texts and stuff like that. So I feel like it's the same.
I mean, I've embraced it. Actually, that's the catalyst that keeps me going, right? Because when I think about the students who came to learn with us every Friday, once a month, and I think about all the miles that the professors put in to get here when, half of the world literally forgot that we exist, right? That's the stuff that motivates me to keep going. And then knowing that it's brothers in here that's rooting for me. I know when I step on a plane, I'm representing at least 70 million people with criminal records here in America.
That's a lot on your shoulders.
So, I'm very conscious of that. And, the thing that makes me smile is to show all the people who put the work in order for me to be there that their work is not in vain.
So I've got one more question, sort of quick one, so we can end on a visionary note for all of you. So I was in Italy last week, and I was at a prison called Bollate. It's got some pretty amazingly progressive things going on, and one of them is that students are allowed to come and go work on the outside and also be involved in education on the outside, university on the outside. And I went to the University of Milan, and I was with a number of the people who facilitate that happening, some social workers who run a wonderful program. And we were sitting in the cafe surrounded by University of Milan students, and I looked outside and they said, "Oh, there's a Bollate student." And I see a gentleman wearing a fly Italian suit, smoking a cigarette, sipping an espresso, with a Heidegger textbook in his Heidegger book in his hand, talking to a young lady, just being a normal student. And for me, I almost burst out into tears on the spot. It was such a beautiful sight. And when I think about reimagining prisons or what a reimagined prison looks like, that is one of the first visions that I have. So I'm curious if you could all have that vision for us. When you think about a reimagined prison, what's a scene that comes to mind or a vision that comes to mind?
For me, it would be night classes. So inside like prison, inside of here, you don't have access to night classes, which that could be something that's like the same kind of vibe that you get out there in colleges, because we don't have like that much space. So I'll say it's just a bigger space, but I like your idea too. I'll let it go to Wesleyan from here.
Putting it out there.
Yeah, definitely.
When we spoke earlier, I was telling you how I had such a creative mind, and my gift is imagination. And I'm pretty sure I could come up with plenty of ideas on how we can reimagine prisons, but like I can't see myself trying to even though I support what we're doing, what they're doing with the reimagining prison thing, I can't reimagine bondage, kind of sort of going towards what Brianna from Just Leadership was saying. Like, we need to dismantle. That's what we need to do, is dismantle prisons instead of trying to reimagine it.
I got nothing after that one. But I would say this. I could reimagine seeing these brothers with a suit on, right? Because I did actually see that in July on Mandela Day, when we launched the Prison to College Pipeline program in South Africa. We literally went from seeing brothers in their regular attire to the next day seeing them all 30 of them in suits. So I think that the business sector could at least drop off a few suits into a prison as a means to build some self-efficacy so people will feel important.
Clothing is a kind of language, right?
To kind of piggyback on the discussion we had about architecture, when I think of prisons as these big imposing structures with barbed wire and gates and bars on the windows, that doesn't create a space that's good for healing, for introspection, for reflection. And these are the things that we want to have, for this transformation to have happen inside of prisons. And I think underneath that question is asking, like, what do people deserve? And I don't think that I'm in a position to say what people deserve. I think that's for us as people to decide together.
Beautiful. I like ending that on a collective note. So thank you to these amazing panelists, and can we do a round of applause? And on that note, I toss it back to you, Fred, in New York.
So change is inevitable, but transformation is a conscientious choice. As we close today, we ask that each of you, all of you, leave fully committed to transforming the conditions of confinement in U.S. jails and prisons and how we treat incarcerated individuals. We ask that you devote yourself in whatever your respective roles as community activists, policymakers, correctional leaders, philanthropic individuals, that you really focus on the fact that the 2.2 million individuals behind bars are a part of our broader American society, and they deserve to have their intrinsic value and human dignity respected. And it's also about respecting the rights, the capacity of those individuals to change and grow. We will be putting out a recording of this entire event about a week from now, and so you'll be able to access that. I want to thank all of you who've joined us from wherever in America. Thank you all for being here. Thanks for your time. Thanks to all the panelists. Have a good day.